Episode 161, The Fairy Tale Beginning. 6-year-old Prince Brad and his beautiful and elegant mother, Princess Riley, had been relaxing inside their luxurious hillside villa. After spending another day roaming around the lively city of Paralgan, they had been staying in the Laxmarian seaside city for 2 weeks, exploring the hilly, winding streets and cafes, nearby beaches, and the bustling markets. Although young Brad had been a little bored on occasion, he had been happy enough to spend time with his mother, who had clearly been enjoying the vacation, despite the absence of his cold and distant father. It had always been obvious that Brad was a bright boy and much older than his years. He had understood that his father was the type of person who was hungry for money and power. He had provided his son with no love or affection, but Brad had not craved his father's love because his mother had always provided all the love and care he could ever need or ask for. And even at his tender age, he had reasoned that there was little value in wasting energy pursuing affection from a stranger he'd only seen briefly once each year. His mother had been his entire world, and all he had ever needed. Brad had sworn that he would always protect his mother at all costs, as he somehow felt that his father would fail to keep her safe. Princess Riley had been watching her son reading and had sighed. "What kind of book are you reading?" "Those books are for old men, not for children your age. I have told you before, you should try reading a fairy tale. Try this one and I'll play a little piano to encourage you, okay?" she had said gently as she smiled. Then she had removed the book entitled The Future of Technological Advancement and replaced it with a book entitled Beauty and the Beast. However, the young prince had just stared at the book's cover with blank, uninterested eyes before he had innocently looked at his mother. "Mom, do you mind that I'm very different from everyone else?" he had asked, and his mother had just ruffled his hair gently in response as she had leaned across the piano bench. "Listen, Brad, to me, you're different, but nobody in the world is better than you. You're amazing and exceptional, and I'm really proud that my lovely son is so intelligent. But I still want you to have a normal childhood and experience being a child in the normal way," she had explained. "Do you understand?" Brad had just nodded. He would have never wanted to offend or upset his mother, so he had obediently opened the book. But as soon as he had read the words, "Once upon a time," he let out a long and heavy sigh of boredom and raised his head. As if taking that as her cue to begin, his mother had started playing the piano while he had closed his eyes and leaned his head on his armchair. He never did read any further than the opening words, "Once upon a time," and soon he had fallen asleep listening to his lullaby. The day of Brad's 7th birthday had finally arrived, but there was no sign of his father, Brandon. Riley hadn't been able to describe how hurt she felt. She had long ago accepted that there was no love lost between her and Brad's father, but she couldn't believe that he didn't care about their son. Princess Riley had been a good person and a loving mother, but rage and hate had begun to form in her heart. She had tolerated everything that her husband had done all these years for the sake of Brad, but right then, she felt as though she had finally reached her limit. She wanted to cry and curse him, but with Brad by her side, she didn't want to reveal her disappointment, so she had concealed her intense heartbreak. Riley had decided to go ahead with the birthday celebration in the absence of Brad's father. But that same day, one phone call had set off a chain of events that had eventually transformed their peaceful world into one of utter chaos. Riley had received a call from her husband, and his words had sent shivers of fear up and down her spine. Brandon had ordered them to return home immediately and had told her that Laxamar was already in a state of chaos. The city of Valparaiso was far from the capital, and they had felt no unrest or danger. But fearful that the unrest would spread, Riley had had no choice but to flee. They had immediately left their villa in the desperate hope that they would be able to leave the country before it was too late. On their way to the airport, a deafening sound had halted everything. The ground shook, and as they watched the dark smoke rise and spread across the blue sky, it had felt as though it was the beginning of all hell breaking loose. Episode 162, Child Prodigy. On that day, chaos enveloped the entire city of Valparaiso. Communication networks had suddenly been disabled, and rebels had gained control of the local airport. Panic had spread throughout the city, affecting the rich and poor alike. Princess Riley and her son, Prince Brad, along with their 3 bodyguards, had attempted to leave the city by car, along with thousands of other people fleeing for their lives. But it had already been too late, and within a single day, the city had already been captured by the rebels. After days of trying to find ways to escape, the mother and son had eventually been captured. One of their captors had recognized Princess Riley, and so had brought them to the rebels' newly established headquarters. Mother and son had been locked up in a secure room and kept under constant surveillance. They had not been mistreated, but Riley had been terrified about the increasing risks of the fighting taking place around them and in the city itself, and her fear and anxiety had caused a rapid deterioration in her health. 7-year-old Brad had watched as his mother's health had declined, and had started to think of ways to help her. After Brad and his mother had been in captivity for a few days, the rebels had started to notice Brad's exceptional intelligence. One day, one of the rebels had pulled him aside and taught him how to hack a computer system. He had been a willing and eager student, not to mention a genius, and within days he had mastered the science of hacking. The rebel soldiers had been staggered by Brad's ability and had found it hard to comprehend that a 7-year-old boy had accomplished in only a few days what was beyond most adults. They had begun to treat him with respect, like a real prince, even though he was indeed in fact a real prince by blood. As Brad requested, they had also started to treat his mother well and provided her with everything she had needed, including a personal doctor to check on her health. Young Brad hadn't wanted any harm to come to his mother, and because the rebels had known she was his weak spot, they had used her to make the boy agree to everything they wanted him to do. Months went by, and Brad had learned almost everything about the so-called Red Rebels. They had been a mixed group of people, including former soldiers, exiled individuals, rogue scientists, former archivists, criminals, and anti-government revolutionaries. But what had concerned him the most was the Red Rebels had been backed by various dark organizations and some powerful countries whose intention had been to create chaos and overthrow cities of their choosing. So while the Red Rebels had been a diverse group, they had never simply been a ragtag bunch of insurgents. They had been strong individuals with strengths and skills in both combat and intelligence. It had been almost as if they had been carefully handpicked to form an elite army capable of conquering a nation. And then eventually, the little prince had been forced to join them. The young boy had spent his days in front of computer screens as the Red Rebels' new ace hacker. Brad had truly proved himself to be a computer genius and had left the rebels wide-eyed and slack-jawed countless times when they had witnessed what he had been able to accomplish with just a few clicks and command codes. A year went by, and little Brad had slowly become one of the world's most dangerous hackers. The boy had eventually become one of the group's most important individuals. He had taken his orders directly from the Red Rebels' leader. He had started hacking enemy bases, stealing sensitive information, and leaving chaos in his wake. The dark organizations and the countries backing the Red Rebels had heard about him, and they had also started eyeing him with great interest. They had ordered everyone in the group to protect him at all costs and keep him happy. They had nurtured him and had turned him into a powerful human weapon. They had granted him everything he desired, with one exception. The only wish they had never granted was to allow his mother to return home. The leader had been well aware of what drove the young boy. They had known that the moment they sent his mother home, they would no longer have control over the boy genius. Young Brad had started joining in the combat training with some of the few skilled young teens the group had recruited in the city. He had been physically exceptional, but the training had been gruesome, and he had been trained to fight and kill. The leader had urged him not to participate in the training for fear of injuring himself, but Brad had been determined and wouldn't listen to anybody else. Eventually, the civil war in Laxkamar spread widely, and other countries had joined the war to drive away the Red Rebels. As a result of that development, the mastermind behind the Red Rebels had ordered that Brad and his mother be transported to a secret base in a mountainous region of one of the countries to the north, Kantroma. Episode 163, Child Number 0. The town of Alta Vista in Kantroma had been home to around 10,000 individuals and lay 8,000 feet above sea level on a plateau above a river valley. On its northern and western perimeters were steep drops to the valley floor. It had been both beautiful and peaceful, and had been home to the secret headquarters of the renowned underground organization known as Blackleaf. Blackleaf had been backed by the government of Kantroma and had been deemed to be among one of the biggest threats to the human race. It had been known to be secretly developing chemical and nuclear weapons. The town had been a safe haven for exiled and rogue scientists recruited to help conduct a variety of unauthorized experiments. The existence of the organization had been cloaked in mystery. The support that had been provided to Blackleaf by the government meant that it had been almost impossible for anyone other than those deemed worthy to set foot inside the secret headquarters or even the town itself. Brad and his mother had been told they were to live in the town, while Brad joined the elite group of Blackleaf hackers who were trained as notorious cybercriminals and spies. Living in this strange new town had been like being captured all over again. Brad had been separated from his mother and had been forced to work long hours while they had pushed him to achieve results. Initially, everyone had looked down on Brad and had believed his skills as a hacker to be only gossip and rumor. No one had believed a child could possess the skills only an experienced and capable adult would have after several years of training. However, as he spent his days as the only child in the group of adult hackers, Brad had continued to exceed expectations. His hacking skills had surpassed every one of the organization's hopes, as he had outperformed everyone. When he was only 9 years old, Brad had been ordered to steal documents from Laskamar's military defense system. Although he had been reluctant, they had threatened his mother, and therefore he had been persuaded to comply. They had known he would do anything to ensure his mother's safety. Within only a few hours, he had managed to infiltrate the Laskamarian government system, stolen sensitive documents, and exited without leaving a trace. The entire town of Alta Vista had learned of this seemingly impossible achievement and had celebrated it as a massive victory. Those who had known what Brad had done began to treat him like a king. Even the country's president had sent his military chief to confirm personally that the news about Brad's abilities and accomplishments were true. Since then, everyone had started treating him with respect, and no one confronted him or spoke out of turn around him. The government and Blackleaf had quickly realized what kind of power the boy had, and they had decided to keep him at all costs. Steps had been taken to keep him happy, and they had provided everything he asked for, except the freedom to leave the town. So after years of keeping Brad closely guarded and effectively confined to barracks, they had finally loosened their grip on him. They had finally allowed him to roam freely around the town without guards, and he had been able to spend more time with his mother. But he had remained a caged bird. And the only difference was that he had been transferred to a larger cage where he could at least fly around a little. What nobody had realized was that Brad had already begun to plot countless escape plans in his head, since he had realized what was happening in the place he and his mother had been living. Roaming freely around the town had allowed Brad the opportunity to notice the extent of the illegal activities that had been taking place. In one building he had visited, Brad had encountered a group of children around his own age. They were pale, almost vampire-like, and he had asked around about them. He had tracked down an old scientist and had learned from him that they were the survivors of test tube experiments, where scientists had attempted to create compliant geniuses, skillful in the art of war, living weapons, obedient to their masters. The old scientist had told him that dozens of children had been born as a result of these experiments, but most had subsequently died at different stages, and only 11 remained. The children had had the numbers from 1 to 10 tattooed on their backs. The evidently heartless scientist had told him that names were unnecessary, so the children had been numbered according to their level of obedience. But young Brad's attention had been drawn to the boy numbered 0. He had asked why his number was 0 and had learned from the scientist that it had been because he had been a complete failure. Number 0's physical well-being had been almost superhuman, but he had been impossible to control. The old scientist had also told him that they had been planning to send him to the war zone so he could at least be useful, or that they might use him as a guinea pig in further experiments. These words had made Brad quietly clench his fists as his gaze had fallen on the boy in a white gown. As though a sixth sense had compelled him, Number 0 had looked up, and his eyes had met Brad's. As Brad had looked deep into Number 0's dangerous eyes, he had felt like he needed him on his side. At the same time, he had realized that 0 wasn't a failure. He had been the only one among the 11 children who could still be called human. They had failed to control him because, unlike the other 10, his eyes still held a spark of life, and he had not been transformed into a complete robot. It had been at that moment that Brad had felt he needed to have him as an ally in order for him and his mother to have a chance of escaping this hell. Episode 164, Introducing Tyler. It had been fall when they had granted Brad's request to remove 0 from the lab. Of course, the organization had asked Brad to create an advanced spying malware program in return. Once he had succeeded in his task, Brad had taken 0 from the lab, and to everyone's surprise, the usually wild and untamed boy had just followed behind Brad like an obedient pet. The boy 0 hadn't spoken a word since they had left the huge clinical lab surrounded by high walls. As soon as he had stepped through the gate and out into the daylight, his eyes had widened, and his mouth had hung open. He had obviously been surprised by the open blue skies, the many buildings, and the mountains extending out to the horizon as far as he could see. Brad hadn't been surprised by his reaction at all. He had understood it was because the boy had spent the entire 9 years of his life inside the lab and had never been exposed to the outside world. The 2 young boys had been walking quietly along the roadside when they saw a group of small cottages with views across the valley. The boy followed Brad and matched his pace, and when Brad had stopped, he had immediately come to a standstill next to him. Brad looked at these little houses. Each cottage had been different from the next. Their walls were painted in assorted colors, and they each had window boxes with a variety of well-cared-for plants. But what they all had in common were beautiful terracotta-tiled roofs to protect the house from the elements. Each roof had been constructed with professional skill and precision, with perfectly engineered tiles. And it had struck Brad how important it was to the house. It instantly reminded him of someone who, too, was as perfect as these precise engineered tiles. As he quietly considered this, he turned to look at the boy standing behind him. "From now on, your name is Tyler," he had said, and the boy had just blinked twice before he had obediently nodded. Tyler had followed Brad everywhere he went from then on, even to the house where Riley had been staying. Brad's mother treated Tyler as if he were her son and had nurtured him with the same love and care she had shown Brad. As time went by, Tyler had learned how to become more like a normal human being. On the other hand, Brad had continued to be pressured to perform high-level cybercrimes in the name of Blackleaf. The organization had maintained that they would one day release his mother, but Brad knew these promises were no more than lies. The organization had never allowed Brad to touch a computer or cell phone without supervision. While he had been their trump card, they feared he could be their undoing in a single keystroke. Brad's every move had been monitored under close surveillance. This continued for another 2 years. Brad had never once disobeyed the organization's orders, and he had done everything he could to gain their trust. It had been important that they believed him to be loyal to the core. Eventually, Blackleaf's commander had sent him back to Laskamar on a high-profile mission to shut down Laskamar's military bases in preparation for an all-out attack on the capital that the Red Rebels had planned. Brad had returned to Laskamar with Riley and Tyler, and they had been transported to Blackleaf headquarters there. Laskamar had still been under heavy fire as the rebels and the government had fought to gain control. Cities had been lost and won by both sides, and neither had seemed to be able to maintain the upper hand. After a year had been spent organizing the mission, and when the day of the planned attack had finally arrived, 12-year-old Brad had been taken to a heavily guarded room and was ready to receive his orders. But the rebels had remained wary of Brad, so they had brought his mother and Tyler and threatened their safety to guarantee he would carry out the attack as planned. Despite his loyalty all those years, they had told him that if he failed to carry out the mission properly, they would kill his beloved mother in front of him. And as an additional warning, they had also beat Tyler, just in case Brad had harbored any hopes of Tyler rescuing his mother. And so, it was with a cold heart that Brad had done as they asked, without batting an eyelid. That day, the world's most terrifying and accomplished hacker had been introduced to the world. He had successfully shut down the military bases, and that had allowed the Red Rebels to infiltrate the capital successfully. But nobody apart from Brad and Tyler had known that everything that had happened had already been predicted by Brad. He had anticipated the sequence of events since the day Tyler had stepped out of the lab, and he had exploited Blackleaf and the Red Rebels' plans to their very roots. No one knew that he had purposely complied with the Red Rebels to facilitate their escape. And so, while the Red Rebels had been focusing on attacking the capital, in the middle of war and chaos, using Tyler's combat ability and Brad's perfect escape plan, the two of them, along with Riley, had successfully escaped the clutches of evil. Episode 165, Tragedy Strikes. As the battle in the capital had continued, Brad, Tyler, and Princess Riley had headed toward the country's border. Meanwhile, the Red Rebels who had attacked the capital had been caught off guard. They had expected the military to have been immobilized following Brad's cyber attack, but the second they had reached the inner city, the military had in fact been perfectly prepared. It had been as if they had been expecting them. No one among the rebels had known that before Brad shut down the bases, he had actually sent several secret-coded messages warning the government of the upcoming attack. That day had marked the end of the once fearsome group known as the Red Rebels, and what had happened to them and the news of Brad's escape had immediately caused Blackleaf's leader to quake in fear. They had realized that it was a certain monster that had manipulated the fate of the entire army of Red Rebels. That monster had been none other than Brad, the child prodigy and expert hacker whose skills had greatly surpassed all known hackers. On that same day, in the small remote town of Alta Vista in Cantroma that Brad had left just a year before, there would be an event that would cause ripples across the world. Not many knew what had happened that day, but those that had witnessed it described the event as the beginning of a nightmare. Loud sirens had started sounding all around the town and were suddenly muffled. Cars, buildings, streets, and the mountainous landscape had all suddenly been swallowed by a brilliant flash of light. Then it had been as though the muted volume on a stereo had suddenly been cranked back up again, and the noise, had been earth-shattering. Pillars of fire, smoke, and dust had risen high above the mountains as Alta Vista was destroyed by a nuclear weapon. The entire town had been annihilated, along with half of its population. Brad had been miles away at the time and completely unaware of what had happened in Alta Vista. He had been focused entirely on their escape. The Canterman government released a global television broadcast stating that their secret nuclear weapons facility located in the town of Alta Vista had been hacked and the weapons detonated. There had been uproar and civil unrest as the public feared for their safety after the explosion. The news had also revealed the identity of the hacker behind the attack as a 12-year-old boy named Brad. The information had been distributed globally, calling Brad a notorious cybercriminal responsible for the annihilation of the town of Alta Vista. He had been labeled a monster without morals, capable of destroying the world. Meanwhile, Brad, Tyler, and Princess Riley had reached a small airport close to the border. Tyler had managed to hijack a private jet while Brad had acquired a cell phone. Brad had hacked his father's phone and sent him a message that they were escaping. He had asked his father to meet them at the border with Talavancha. They had landed just inside the Talavancan border and disembarked from the small plane. But instead of his father, they had been greeted by military choppers. They had had no choice but to return to the small plane, and just before they had been able to climb back on board, Brad had heard a loud crack and was stunned to see his mother fall to the ground. She had been shot in the back. Brad's world had slowed to a halt. He had lifted his mother in his arms and had begun to cry. There had been blood pooling from his mother's wound, and his throat had tightened as he realized there was nothing he could do to help. When his mother had told him to leave, he couldn't speak. "My son, please, you should leave. Promise me you'll leave. I'll always be watching over you, wherever you go," she had said. And before she had taken her last breath, she had asked Tyler to take her son away and protect him. Realizing the increasing danger of capture, Tyler had taken the princess from Brad's arms and had laid her on the ground while Brad had remained kneeling and broken by her side. The chopper's blades had been getting louder and the floodlights closing in when Tyler had grabbed an almost lifeless Brad and threw him inside the plane to escape. Episode 166, A New Start. That night, young Tyler had single-handedly protected a heartbroken young Brad. Their plane engine had been shot by the pursuing helicopters, which had forced them to leave the plane in midair. Under the cover of night, they had shared a single parachute and had landed in a forest. As they fell to the ground, Tyler had seen lights from a remote village somewhere near Talavancha's borders and had decided to make their way there. While Tyler had carried Brad on his back, Brad's mind and body had sunk into darkness. Unable to deal with the pain caused by his mother's death, Brad had begun subconsciously to kill every emotion left inside him. He had felt that he would be unable to continue living with the agony of his grief. When Brad had been able to analyze the situation, he had figured that there had already been an assassin waiting for them at their meeting place that night. Nobody had known the location of the meeting place other than his father. Hate and anger had filled Brad's entire being, and he had swore to one day destroy his father for what he had done. "He will pay 1,000,000-fold for the pain and suffering that he has inflicted, and for the death of my beloved mother," he had vowed. A few days had passed before Brad had returned to Lascamar, and it was there that he had learned the news that he was already one of the world's most wanted criminals. The military and the media had labeled him with the code name Monster, which had caused an evil smirk to flash across his face. Episode 166, A New Start. That night, young Tyler had single-handedly protected a heartbroken young Brad. Their plane engine had been shot by the pursuing helicopters, which had forced them to leave the plane in midair. Under the cover of night, they had shared a single parachute and had landed in a forest. As they fell to the ground, Tyler had seen lights from a remote village somewhere near Talavancha's borders and had decided to make their way there. While Tyler had carried Brad on his back, Brad's mind and body had sunk into darkness. Unable to deal with the pain caused by his mother's death, Brad had begun subconsciously to kill every emotion left inside him. He had felt that he would be unable to continue living with the agony of his grief. When Brad had been able to analyze the situation, he had figured that there had already been an assassin waiting for them at their meeting place that night. Nobody had known the location of the meeting place other than his father. Hate and anger had filled Brad's entire being, and he had swore to one day destroy his father for what he had done. "He will pay 1,000,000-fold for the pain and suffering that he has inflicted, and for the death of my beloved mother," he had vowed. A few days had passed before Brad had returned to Lascamar, and it was there that he had learned the news that he was already one of the world's most wanted criminals. The military and the media had labeled him with the code name Monster, which had caused an evil smirk to flash across his face. Operating from the abandoned secret base of the fallen Red Rebels in Peralgan, Brad had started attacking every media and government organization that had ever held information about him. He had destroyed all existing evidence about himself and had left no trace whatsoever, but by doing that, he had only confirmed the existence of the so-called monster hacker to the world. He had known that until he could prove that he was not responsible for what had happened in the town of Alta Vista, he would forever remain in a world of darkness. As time had passed, Brad had started amassing power of his own. His powerful brain and intellect had made it easy for him to gain control of a country, especially one torn apart by war. Lascamar had been without a leader following the death of the president, and the outside sources who had participated in the war had long ago abandoned the country. New rebel groups and organizations from the opposition had clamored for power like vultures circling their wounded prey. Citizens had taken to the streets, and pressure had been on the government to end the unrest. It had been then that Brad had offered his help to the government. The military chief had been one of the government officials meeting with Brad. It was he who had received the coded messages about the Red Rebels' attack, back when Brad and Tyler had made their escape. The chief had realized that Brad and the monster who had provided the advance warning were one and the same person. And now that person had approached them to offer his help once again. The country had been very unstable at that time, with few allies and a shortage of resources. Knowing that the monster had been deemed responsible for the destruction of Alta Vista and was being pursued for this crime, they had initially been wary of him. They had feared that he had a plan to destroy their country, but they had been at their weakest at that time, and very few options were open to them. If they had done nothing, the situation would have only gotten worse. They had decided to listen to what Brad had to say. At the meeting, Brad had laid out plans to settle the unrest, grow the economy, and restore the country to its former glory. As he had explained his strategy, he had demonstrated charisma and presence that had awed the officials, but ultimately, the reason they had accepted his offer of assistance had been because they had been in dire straits. Since that time, Brad had secretly been involved in settling every conflict within the country. He had worked behind the scenes, acting as head of the country's technical intelligence agency as he undertook projects to root out corruption and unethical practices. As a result of his intervention, the country had recovered and had attracted foreign investment. The government had stabilized, and the president's position had strengthened with Brad directing his moves from behind the scenes. He had continued in his role as the president's shadow puppet master, ensuring he remained in power to maintain peace and prosperity for the nation. In exchange, the government had vowed to protect him at all costs. He had become Lascamar's savior. A year later, Brad had become the leader of one of the world's largest secret organizations, which was run by the Clark family. As a result, he and Tyler had ended up becoming part of the Clark family. The Clark family had been one of the richest families in Lascamar before the war. During the unrest, the family's sole heir, Kevin Clark, had disappeared, and the Clark family had decided to step back and start to wind back the family business, Clark International Corporation. Brad and Tyler had met Kevin during their escape and had witnessed his death. The head of the family and the business, Brad had told him what had happened to his son. The family had been so grateful to finally know the truth about their son's fate that Mr. Clark had invited Brad to take Kevin's identity. He had also accepted Tyler into the family as an adopted son. Brad had taken over the running of Clark International Corporation, and under his leadership, the rise of the Clark family business began anew. Years went by, and the Clark International Corporation had quickly risen to a new peak. Its success had spread exponentially under the leadership of a mysterious man who had never once appeared in public, named Kevin Clark. Episode 167, Haley to the Rescue. Brad and Tyler had just landed at Lascamar's largest military base, Port Red, and every high official, including the president, was there to welcome his return. The country that had been in chaos a decade ago had become one of the richest countries in the region, and it was one of the few countries with a strong military presence. Furthermore, unknown to the world, the man who had been responsible for leading the country to its present glory and ridding it of its unrest and internal conflict was none other than the infamous hacker Monster, who was wanted all across the globe. And Brad, known as Kevin Clark, had remained as the country's leader behind the shadow of the president. When he visited, he was always treated with respect and dignity. The country was, after all, under his complete control. Once he had attended a few important meetings regarding government issues, Brad had left Tyler to represent him while he went to spend some time in a hall created especially for him. dubbed the King's Hall. It was a special place located in the center of Port Red, and where Brad carried out his high-profile cyber surveillance and hacking work. As soon as he was settled inside the hall, he didn't waste a moment before he set to work reinvestigating the cause of the world's most mysterious nuclear disaster, the explosion at Alta Vista. A week had passed, and Brad was still hard at work in the King's Hall, examining clues, analyzing evidence, and scrutinizing the tiniest of details in the hope that something would eventually lead him to finally solving the mystery. Tyler was the only person allowed to disturb Brad in the King's Hall. As soon as he had entered the hall and seen just how focused Brad was among the screens in front of him, he sighed. Good grief, he's been like that for a whole week without any proper rest at all. He can't continue like this, he thought. He recognized how totally engrossed Brad became when he was like this and knew that he would never listen to him, even if Tyler were only trying to persuade him to take a short break or grab a bite to eat to keep his energy up. Tyler suddenly had an idea. He knew a surefire way to make Brad take a break, or at least eat something, but he would have to appeal to Brad's lifeline for help. He stood just inside the hall entrance and secretly took a photo of Brad from behind, and then he sent it to Haley with a short caption. SOS. As predicted, Haley called back immediately, but Tyler didn't take the call, worried that Brad might throw him out if he were to start disturbing him. Instead, he quickly replied with a message. Don't call right now. Your husband might throw me out. He added a winky smiley. Haley replied, quick as a flash. What's wrong? Did something happen? Well, your husband is so focused on his work that he will stop for nothing, not even food or sleep. But that won't do. He should rest. What if he gets sick? He doesn't listen to his body or me. Your husband only listens to his will and his brain. If I told him to eat, he would likely beat me for disturbing him. Now, I know he asked you not to send him any messages or call him, but you're the only one I know who can help, or I'm worried he'll die of starvation. Please send him some cheesy message or something to make him wake up and realize he needs to eat. Okay, I understand. Leave it to me. I could never let my husband starve. That's great. Thank you, Miss Haley. You're his life savior. And please make sure you don't go easy on him. A few seconds after Tyler sent his last message, a familiar sound echoed inside the hall. It was a notification alert on Brad's phone, and he finally shifted his focus away from his computer screen to reach for his cell phone. His intense concentration now interrupted. Brad frowned as he picked up his cell phone, but as soon as he saw the message, the serious expression on his face disappeared and softened as he seemed to forget about his mission for a moment. Tyler had expected such a reaction from him upon receiving a message from Haley, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to know exactly what she had said. He slowly and quietly crept further into the room and stood behind Brad to peek at the message. I'm imagining you're eating without me. I think I miss you. Have you eaten yet? Tyler just raised an eyebrow. What? How boring. It's not as if she sent him a message telling him she was pregnant. It's just a simple I miss you message. This woman is full of surprises, mused Tyler. Episode 168. I miss her. Brad had stared at the message thoughtfully for a long time before he finally seemed to reach a decision. And to Tyler's surprise, he got up noisily from his chair, gripped his cell phone, and quietly started walking away. Tyler stopped him by putting his hand on his shoulder. Hey, where are you going? He asked. Brad just looked at him calmly. Why ask if you already know? But Tyler was confused. He had no idea what was going on in Brad's mind at that moment. When Brad saw the puzzled look on Tyler's face, he responded with a single word. Home. Then he began walking away again. Tyler's eyes widened in disbelief and his mouth fell open. Oh my God, you've just received one short message and already you want to forget about everything and go home. Oh, this isn't what I wanted to happen, damn it, he thought. Hey, stop right there, Brad. Are you really saying that we're going home? Tyler asked as he quickly caught up with him before he could open the door to the hall. Tyler stood between Brad and the door and Brad just glared at him. She wants to see me, Brad said, matter-of-factly. Tyler just glared back at him. Brad, didn't you just come here to solve your problem? Didn't you say you would do this seriously? Is this the kind of resolve you're trying to show? You can't just go back home when you feel like it, Tyler tried to say reasonably, but firmly. But Brad seemed unconcerned. Who said I won't be back? And who was it urging me to take a break? We'll just drop by. An hour will be long enough, he replied. But Tyler became even more disturbed and began to fret when he realized what Brad was proposing. He calls this taking a break, but this is ridiculous, he thought. Hey, Brad, have you forgotten where we are? Are you out of your mind? You want us to travel 12 hours by air and back again. 24 hours of travel for the sake of 1 hour? And you call that taking a break? Tyler's usually calm demeanor was frustrated by this turn of events. Oh no, what have I done? This was not supposed to happen, he thought, panicking. He still remembered what happened the last time they returned home, when Brad received a message that Haley was upset. When he heard Tyler's protests, Brad looked away and then he finally admitted, "I want to see her." Tyler went quiet for a few seconds and then he looked at Brad with a grin as wide as a Cheshire cat. "So this is because you miss her, right?" he asked with his usual mischievous tone. "I miss her?" Brad repeated, and Tyler nodded his head enthusiastically. "Yes, that's right. You're absolutely missing her," he confirmed. Brad gazed at him in confusion. "Listen to me, Brad. When you feel like you want to see someone really badly, then that means you're missing them. Do you get it?" he asked. "So this is how it feels to miss someone." "Well, yes, I get it. But how do you know all these things?" Brad asked. "And don't tell me you've learned all these things through experience, because I know you're just like me." Tyler looked at Brad. "Do I really need to tell you?" he thought, sighing. Tyler would not tell him that he had actually gained much of his knowledge through reading books when he was trying to understand human emotions to help Brad and himself. But Brad did not know that the foundation of all Tyler's knowledge about human emotions had actually come from Brad's mother. In the past, while Brad had been forced to spend all his time in front of computers, Tyler had spent his time with Brad's mother. The stories that Brad had shown no interest in when he was a boy had been told to a young Tyler by Princess Riley. When Brad had rescued Tyler from the laboratory, Tyler had been an empty shell. He had known nothing about emotions, and he hadn't even known how to smile. But as he had spent more and more time with Brad's mother, he had learned many things. It was Riley that had slowly turned him into what he had become. Princess Riley had treated Tyler as if he were her own son. Tyler had been given the opportunity to experience a mother's love, and it was something he would never forget as long as he lived. He would never forget that he, a nameless boy, had been saved and named by Brad, and then unconditionally loved by Brad's mother. Episode 169. Is that really you? Anyway, how do you know all these things? Brad asked as he looked at Tyler doubtfully. What's with the wary look? Tyler thought indignantly. Tyler scratched his neck as he quickly tried to think of something to say. Just as he was about to open his mouth, Brad's cell phone message notification sounded again, and they were both immediately distracted. Brad lifted his phone to read the message while Tyler sidled toward him to peek over his shoulder. Are you eating properly? When he read Haley's message, Brad blinked twice before glancing up at Tyler. Tyler folded his arms and looked back at him smugly. Well, what are you going to tell her? Didn't you say before that you're not going to lie to her? So tell her the truth, that you're not eating at all, Tyler said with a hint of triumph. Brad lowered his head and began to type a reply. Sometimes. Tyler sighed loudly as he shook his head. Hey, you'll have to provide more than a single word response. You have to make an effort. Don't you realize that when you reply like that, she'll just think you're not interested in replying at all? He explained patiently. But you know that's not true, Brad protested. Yes, I know that, but that's how normal people perceive such a message, you see, said Tyler. So what should I do? Asked Brad. Listen, you should just try to write more than a single worded response. If you're lost for words, then use those emojis or pictures or whatever. You're human now, so you should learn about these things. Got it? Asked Tyler. Emoji? Brad looked confused again. Yeah, adding an emoji to a bland message is a way of telling her you're not bored with her messages. Do you understand? Asked Tyler, and then he took Brad's phone and showed him. Here, these things can liven up your boring messages. Pick any of them and send them to her. Any? He asked. Yes, any, Tyler replied. Are you sure? He asked warily. Can't you just do as I say? Tyler said, exasperated. His patience was beginning to wear thin. Meanwhile, Brad continued to look at him doubtfully. Eventually, Brad seemed to understand, and he gave Tyler a look that seemed to say, whatever, as long as it'll please my wife. No matter how ridiculous it seems, I'm fine with it. He stared at his phone for a little longer before he nodded at Tyler like an obedient child. Meanwhile, at Columbia University, Haley had been having lunch with Leonard when she had received a text message from Tyler. SOS. After her text message exchange with Tyler, she had sent Brad a message and had continued with her lunch. She had just finished eating when she read Brad's reply, and reading his single-word response made her frown with worry. She had decided to call him, but just as she was about to dial his number, she received another message from him. She immediately opened it and saw it was a single little yellow thumbs-up emoji. Before she had a chance to react, another message arrived, and this one contained a grinning cat emoji. Less than a second later, another one arrived, and it was a flying heart. And by the fourth one arrived, which contained a dancing spoon, Haley didn't know what to think. What's with all these emojis? Could Brad have sent them? Or could it be that a naughty child has snatched his phone and is playing games? She thought, frowning. A moment ago, Haley had been worried, and now she was puzzled. She just didn't believe that Brad would suddenly begin to send her random emojis out of nowhere, so she decided it was definitely time to call him. As she was about to dial his number again, another message arrived. Sometimes I remember to eat, but sometimes I don't. And once again, Haley was confused and slightly shocked. The latest message had a sleeping emoji, an anchor, and a broken heart at the end of it. There's definitely something wrong. Could it be that he's drunk? She mumbled as she immediately dialed Brad's number. Episode 170, Love is Amazing. Tyler, who had been holding his breath and trying not to burst out laughing, covered his mouth as he looked at Brad. He had told Brad to choose any emojis out of sheer frustration, but he hadn't expected the random choices that Brad had made without even thinking about it. Seriously, Brad, this is too much. I wonder what your wife's reaction is now, he thought. While Tyler was busy laughing to himself, Brad was about to speak when his cell phone vibrated. He stared at the cell phone screen for a while before he answered his wife's call, while Tyler just sidled toward him to try and eavesdrop. Haley was still at Columbia University when she had made the call. When the call connected, she asked, "Hello? Brad? Is this Brad?" And when she heard his voice a split second later, the worried look on her face disappeared.
Yes, it's me.
And she sighed with relief, but at the same time, she felt a little confused as well as curious.
Wait, so this means he had his phone all along?
She thought.
So it was you. You're the one who sent those emojis?
She asked hesitantly to make sure, but when she heard his reply, she almost choked.
Yes, it was. Why? Don't you like them?
He asked. Haley immediately shook her head.
No. I like them. It's just that this was the first time you used them, so I was just wondering why.
She said, and she chuckled. But what he said next almost rendered her speechless.
It's because I don't want you to get bored with my messages,
he explained in his usual calm and composed voice, and Haley smiled and blushed a little.
So that's why you just chose randomly,
she said. Brad just responded, Haley chuckled softly. She had an image inside her head of Brad quietly and adorably tapping away on his phone, just randomly choosing any emoji that his finger hit first.
Oh, Brad, I want to ruffle your hair right now,
she said as she continued to chuckle. She was in such a light mood, and this was without knowing that Brad had asked Tyler to call the military to prepare the fastest aircraft to get him home immediately. Then she spoke again.
Anyway, have you eaten?
She asked, and Brad just fell quiet for a second or two before he could answer.
Not yet,
he replied honestly. Then Tyler suddenly interrupted loudly and said,
He hasn't eaten anything all day.
Brad glared at him. Haley had heard Tyler's words, and what she said next stunned Brad into silence.
What? You haven't eaten at all? All day? I accept that I know nothing about your work situation, but I do know that it's not good to starve yourself. What if you get sick? What if...
Haley paused and took a deep breath, but Brad could tell from the sound of her voice that she was unhappy, and this troubled him.
Why is she suddenly so upset?
He thought.
Sorry, I know I should understand, and I'm sure you're extremely busy, but still, I'm just worried,
she continued, and Brad could hear the worry and anxiety in her voice, which made him feel even worse. Brad gripped his cell phone tightly before he finally spoke.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making you worry. I promise this will not happen again,
he said seriously and solemnly.
I'll eat regularly from now on, so please don't worry anymore,
he assured her. Haley sounded relieved when she replied.
I'm glad to hear that. I won't worry anymore. Just promise me you'll eat lots, okay?
She said, and when her voice returned to its normal, cheerful tone, Brad was relieved.
Yes, I promise,
he said.
And you will rest properly as well, won't you?
She asked.
Yes, I will,
he said.
When you come home, I'll cook you lots of food, and you'll have to eat it all, okay?
Yes, of course,
he replied. Brad just kept agreeing to each of his wife's requests, and Tyler's jaw dropped in disbelief as he heard all the random words coming out of Brad's mouth. I'm sorry, I promise, please? What am I hearing? I want to cry. I've only heard him say the word please once before, when he begged for his mother that time back in town. Seriously? So this is another result of so-called love. It's both terrifying and amazing. Tyler was flabbergasted. Episode 171, Apples. The phone went quiet on both ends as Haley and Brad realized how much they missed each other. They had only been apart for a week, but not seeing her had become torturous. He wondered if, eventually, he would be able to last even a day without seeing her.
Brad?
I'm here,
he replied.
I hope you finish your work soon so you can finally come home,
she said softly and honestly, not hiding the longing in her voice. It hurt him to hear how much she missed him. He was just about to tell her he was coming home for a visit, but paused before the words came out of his mouth. A familiar sound from the computer caught his attention. He turned to look at the monitors and saw a list of unending numbers scrolling up the screen. Brad knew that this was an important clue he had been waiting for. Tyler smiled as he looked at the screens. It was only a matter of time until you found out what happened in Alta Vista, Brad. Tyler then turned his gaze back to Brad, waiting to hear what he would tell his wife.
I'll finish my work fast and come home,
he said before ending the call. After he hung up, he stared miserably at the phone. Tyler patted his shoulder in support. Don't get disheartened, Brad. I think it's definitely better if you finish with this first before you go home. Brad just glared at him sharply, causing Tyler to laugh. Don't get me wrong, I'm not discouraging you because I don't want you to take that deadly trip again. It's because you vowed not to touch Miss Haley until you've resolved this. So, let's get this done. Then the two of you can work on making babies until your heart's content, okay? Brad walked toward the computers, acting as if he hadn't heard a word Tyler had said. But before Brad sat down, he barked an order at Tyler.
Go get me some food.
Tyler immediately left the room. Brad stared at the ceiling for a few minutes before he turned his attention to the computer screen. A few minutes later, Tyler came back, pushing a cart full of food. Brad looked a little confused. He had expected a simple sandwich, but he saw a plate of fruit. His expression darkened. Although Brad didn't take pleasure in eating and wasn't a picky eater, he had always turned his nose up at fruit, swearing he would only eat it if it were the last food on earth. When they had been little, Brad had always given his fruit to Tyler. When Tyler had asked Riley why, she had said that when she and Brad had first been imprisoned, Brad had been forced to eat some rotting fruit that had bugs in it. Even though he had understood that the bugs were harmless, the experience had traumatized 7-year-old Brad, and he wouldn't touch fruit after that. Hey, what's with that face? You know you need to eat something nutritious, and your wife asked me to get you fruit, Tyler explained. Brad's dark expression disappeared when Tyler mentioned it had been Haley's request. Brad tried to look at the fruit, but couldn't, and looked at Tyler instead.
Can't you do something to them? Pulverize them? Ask some scientists to turn them into pills?
Brad asked. Tyler's mouth fell open. Hey, if you don't want to eat these, it's fine. I'll just tell your wife that you hate fruit. Before he could finish his sentence, Brad had snatched an apple from Tyler's hand.
I'll eat it. There's no need to do anything unnecessary,
Brad said, and picked up a knife and clumsily peeled the apple. Tyler shook his head and sighed, then reached out his hand. Give it to me. Stop treating the apple like that. Brad ignored him and continued. So Tyler picked up another apple and knife and peeled it like he was a professional chef. Brad's eyes widened as he watched. Here, Tyler said as he reached out the perfectly peeled apple toward him, but Brad wouldn't take it.
Give me another one,
he said instead. When Tyler didn't move, Brad stood, grabbed another one, and tried again to peel an apple. After peeling 6 apples, Tyler couldn't take it anymore. I brought these for you to eat, not for you to practice with. I'll call your wife if...
I told you, don't do anything unnecessary.
Brad cut through Tyler's words again as he gulped and stared at the apple he had just peeled. Brad's face scrunched up like he was about to taste bitter medicine. He brought the apple to his mouth and took a tentative bite. Tyler couldn't describe the look on Brad's face. Episode 172, Sad Puppy. Leonard had been ordered by Tyler never to leave Haley's side, no matter what. So when she was accepted to Columbia University and started taking classes, Leonard naturally was by her side. He would go to class with her, eat lunch with her, wait for her outside the restroom, and then accompany her home. Leonard's beauty was not lost on the school population. He had been dubbed the school heartthrob, and the way he stuck by Haley's side didn't go unnoticed either. It had been whispered that Haley had won the nearly impossible to get scholarship and that she was very bright. Added to her beauty, most of the students knew who she was, and the two of them had been deemed the school's new power couple. Some of the other students started secretly taking pictures of them together and posting them on various social media accounts. Leonard, what's going on? Have you noticed that everyone seems to be keeping their distance from us? It's weird. Why won't anyone talk to us? It's been a week already, and I feel like they're avoiding us, like we're dangerous villains, she said while they were sitting in a campus cafe. Leonard awkwardly scratched his neck.
Well, I think they think we're a couple, and I don't want to disturb us."
What? Haley was surprised, but then considered what he had said. Well, I guess that makes sense. But see, that's why I keep telling you not to stick beside me so much. It's okay for you to make some friends.
"I don't need friends. You don't want me beside you?"
Leonard replied as he gave her a sad puppy face. Haley couldn't resist the look and didn't push it further. I get it. Okay. Don't be sad. You can stick with me. She patted his head to console him.
"Thank you, Miss Haley."
Leonard went back to eating his meal. The truth was, Leonard found himself in a jam. He had been ordered by Tyler to stick to Haley's side and protect her, but he was afraid of interacting with the other students because he didn't want to have to tell them that he was gay. He had asked her not to tell anyone, and she had agreed. He liked Haley and was fine with only having her to hang out with all day. The second reason he didn't interact with the other students was so that he could keep a barrier around Haley. He didn't want anyone to take advantage of her. He was here as her bodyguard, after all.
"I can't believe I just had to pull out the teary-eyed puppy face to do my job. This is so embarrassing. Definitely the hardest job Tyler's given me yet,"
Leonard complained silently.
"Miss Haley, please don't console me like that when we're in public. It will only draw more attention,"
he whispered. Haley immediately stopped. "Oops, sorry, it won't happen again," she said. He forced himself to smile at her. Episode 173, Amy's Plotting. After school, Haley and Leonard went straight to visit Owen. Upon arrival, Haley was surprised to see Amy there waiting for her. "Amy? Did something happen again?" Haley asked worriedly as she hugged her. "Nope, I'm fine. My father just wanted me to come back home. I think he wants to send me off somewhere else. But hey, I'm used to it." She shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly and laughed mischievously. Haley didn't say anything, but pulled her in for another hug and patted her back. "You don't have to worry about me. I have my secret backer. My grandfather is supporting me secretly. I doubt I would get by without him." "That's good to hear, but I'm still worried because you're not very good at defending yourself." "What do you mean by that?" Amy asked, a little offended. "I mean, you can't even bunch properly. You can't even run fast. You trip over your own feet. What will you do if someone who wants to hurt you comes after you?" Haley was worried about her friend. "Haley, dear, didn't I tell you that a woman has lots of weapons? I don't have your physical capability and unearthly beauty, but I have a secret weapon to bring any unruly man down. Get it?" she said confidently. Haley nodded. She remembered that no boy had ever tried to bully Amy in high school. She didn't understand why, since they could have easily overpowered her, but she had to accept that there was truth in what she said. "Before I leave, I have something I wanted to talk to you about," Amy said as she dragged Haley inside the guest bedroom. They sat on the bed and Amy looked Haley over with curious eyes. "Why are you looking at me like that? What is it?" Haley asked. Amy heaved a sigh before she finally spoke. "I wanted to know what your plans are. You got married out of nowhere, and I have no objection to it because he's such a good man and love him. But to tell you the truth, he's very mysterious. I tried asking Grandpa's men to find out even a little bit about him, but they found no information on him at all. And that ordinary-looking bodyguard of his is the same story. It's as if they're some non-existent human beings. You're a smart girl. I know you know what I'm talking about. That's why I'm curious why you're not saying anything about it." Haley looked away before responding. "I understand where you're coming from, but I'm sorry, Amy. I can't tell you anything right now. But I promise, one day I'll tell you everything," she said with her usual sincere and honest eyes. Amy knew that she wouldn't get more out of her and had to accept her answer. She knew Haley was the kind of person to keep her word. Haley had kept every secret Amy had told her and every promise she had made, so she was sure if Haley wasn't talking, she must have promised not to say anything. "Okay, I get it. But anyway, on to the juicy stuff. What happened when you went home that night you were drunk? Did he do anything after you kissed him?" "I told you already, remember? I fell asleep and the next morning I was sick with a hangover. You didn't find any surprise hickeys anywhere, did you?" Amy asked teasingly. "What? Amy? Just tell me," Amy pleaded. "There's nothing to tell," Haley said firmly. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure," Haley said definitively. Amy let out a frustrated groan and ranted in her head. "It's so strange. It's obvious that man adores her. So why haven't they done anything? How can he have so much self-control when he likes her so much? Is there something wrong with him? Or he just didn't want to do anything while she was drunk? But she's his wife. Maybe it's... Amy's thoughts trailed off. Maybe she had the answer. She relaxed a bit, thinking she had finally figured it out. So, what's your next move? I'm planning to surprise him when he's back, Haley said confidently. A date? Mm-hmm, she hummed, then nodded. Okay, I'll leave the details of the date to you. But before I go, I have a new list of steps for you to follow as soon as you get the chance, okay? Haley agreed, not knowing what Amy had up her sleeve, and Amy smiled smugly. It's time to pave the road to being an auntie. Just you wait, Mr. Self-Control. You're not going to be able to resist your wife once I'm through with her. Episode 174, Loyal Dog. In the main bedroom of a mansion somewhere in Laskamar, a man in pajamas was forced to kneel in front of a man with terrifying eyes. Trembling on his knees was the former president of Laskamar and the founder and current leader of Blackleaf. Zero? He asked in terror. Tyler had snuck into the room without making a sound, slipping past all the mansion's security. Long time no see, Mr. Black, Tyler said in a voice completely devoid of any human emotion. This made the man shake even harder. How did you get... Did you really think you could hide from us? There's nowhere on Earth we couldn't find you. And even if you had surrounded yourself with 1,000 guards, we would get to you. Tyler's cold voice chilled the room as he circled around his prey. Why do you look so surprised? Did you forget how your men created me? Aren't we the monsters that you were always dreaming of? Tyler continued. The man suddenly looked up and started talking. Zero, if you come with me, I can give you everything. Money, freedom, everything. Don't be blind. That monster Brad is just treating you as his loyal dog and nothing more. Can't you see? He's just using you, the man said, thinking that he could change his mind. Contrary to what he expected, Tyler just smirked even more evilly. His loyal dog, huh? Tyler uttered as he smiled again before squatting in front of the kneeling man to look him in the eyes. Do you really think I'm idiotic enough to consider anything you say? Listen, even if what you're saying is true, I don't mind it at all. When he took me with him, my life was already in his hands, so don't even think about it, you understand? Zero, listen. Shut your mouth. Do you want to know why you're still alive? It's because Brad only saw you as a little speck of dust, not worthy of wasting his energy on. But time is up. He finally has a reason to seek you out. So if you want to see the sunrise tomorrow, you better tell me the truth. What happened in Alta Vista? Tyler demanded. Mr. Black's eyes grew wide with fear, and he began begging immediately. Zero, believe me, even we don't have any idea what happened that day. If you don't believe me, Brad can take control of the whole country's information system. We know nothing about what happened. That's why we blame the disaster on him, he said. Not liking his answer, Tyler struck him. Brad had been listening to the entire conversation from behind his computer through the mic and earpiece Tyler was wearing. He clenched his fist tightly and spoke to Tyler. Tyler, don't kill him. We still need him. Come back now, he said. Brad placed his head in his hands. His face was dark and unpleasant. Figuring out who was responsible for the destruction of Alta Vista had been harder, more complicated, and more mysterious than Brad had anticipated. Tyler had just confirmed that Blackleaf knew nothing about what had happened. While this should have discouraged Brad, it fueled the fire in him. This was the first time something had ever challenged him so much. Hours later, Tyler returned with a disappointed look on his face. That rat really was useless. What do we do now, Brad? It seems like this won't be easy at all. He was surprised to see the glimmer in Brad's eyes. Tyler let out a sigh and slouched in his chair. Other than Haley, nothing had ever held Brad's interest like this. What are you planning to do, Brad? We're going home, he said. Tyler immediately stood noisily and threw his hands in the air. Finally. It's been 3 weeks. I want to eat Miss Haley's food, Tyler said energetically. Brad patted Tyler's shoulder, causing him to turn toward him with a puzzled look. You're not my dog or anything like that, Brad said before he walked past him, leaving Tyler speechless for a while before a wide, mischievous smile spread across his face. What's this, Brad? You're actually bothered by what that damn rat said? Tyler asked happily as he caught up with him. It's not that. It's because no matter how hard I try to see it, you don't look like a dog. And you're not obedient at all, Brad said nonchalantly. Hey, I only disobey when I know your orders are too risky, you know, he retorted, but Brad ignored him as he continued walking away. Hey, don't ignore me. Episode 175, Matchmaker. When Brad had noticed that the car wasn't heading toward the airport, he immediately threw Tyler a cold glare. Tyler sighed. We're just going to drop by at the old house. I know you're itching to go home right now, but they've been calling since we got here. Brad's cold glares dissipated a bit. Visiting their adoptive parents wasn't the only reason Tyler wanted to delay leaving. It was actually because Haley had asked Tyler to buy her a little time so she could prepare whatever surprise she had planned for Brad. Brad and Tyler walked through the doors of the luxurious old castle that was home to the Clark family. When Thomas and Madeline Clark saw their two adopted sons walking toward them, they greeted them with warm hugs. Brad accepted stiffly, like he always did. You two brats, how could you neglect visiting us for so long? When are you going to give me a great-grandson? I'm not getting any younger. James Clark, Thomas's father, chastised them. The angry statement had made everyone turn their heads toward the elderly man with the sour face, but as usual, Brad was unaffected by him and just averted his eyes and didn't reply. My, Dad. Please calm down. I think it's still too early for our Brad to give us a grandchild. Let's not pressure him. He needs more time, okay? Madeline said to her father-in-law, trying to coax him to relax. But he didn't seem placated by her words, and Tyler leaned into Brad to whisper in his ear. Don't just stand there. Say something, or the old man will never calm down. And what about you? James asked, pointing his finger at Tyler. I can arrange a marriage for you if you don't do something soon. Tyler choked, listening to his grandfather's threat. What? You can't just say stuff like that, Tyler exclaimed. He got the serious expression on Brad's face and wanted to cry. He walked up to the elderly man. Grandpa. James cut him off with a scolding. You said that you could find a wife for Brad that would melt his ice and turn him into a human again. What about you? Are you incapable of finding such a woman for yourself? Are the two of you afraid or something? Tyler began to sweat. Grandpa, I told you not to worry, didn't I? I found the Iceman a wife. Thomas, Madeline, and James all turned to stare at him in shock. What did you just say? They all exclaimed at once. Don't look at me. Why don't you ask him yourself? Tyler complained. All three then turned to stare at Brad, but after a few seconds of silence, they all turned back to Tyler again. Never mind him. He'll only give us 1 or 2 word answers. You talk, Tyler. Tell us everything. Why does my life seem to be getting harder and harder? He wondered before giving in and explaining about Haley. He pulled out his phone and showed everyone pictures he had secretly taken of Brad and Haley as proof. There was a collective sigh of relief, and James' sour mood vanished. He proudly patted Tyler on the shoulder. You did a good job, Tyler. Because of your hard work, I shall reward you. The old man said happily. Tyler immediately backed 1 step away from him. He had an awful feeling he wasn't going to like whatever reward he was about to receive. There's no need, Grandpa. I willingly helped Brad without any conditions, and actually, I really didn't do all that much, he trailed off. No, it's already settled. I have found a fiancé for you. She's a beautiful lady from the United States. Her grandfather's my friend, so you had better behave, he warned. Tyler tried to sneak away and run for his life, but James grabbed his arm. Grandpa, look, Brad is about to have a child soon, so you don't need to... Shut up. I was the one who gave you a surname, so you should listen to me at least as well as you listen to Brad, James barked. Before Tyler could argue, Brad spoke up. Do what you want with him for now. I think I'll go and rest for a bit. Madeline escorted Brad out of the room, leaving Tyler to fend for himself. You selfish man. How could you leave me here alone in a crisis like this? Tyler thought. Tyler continued to try and coax his grandfather to let him go when the maid announced that their visitors had arrived. I'm warning you, Tyler. You had better behave. Your fiancé is here. It's a good thing you came home tonight. Well, really, I think this is a sign that you are fated to be together, James said. He looked so happy and proud of himself, but Tyler could barely breathe. He coughed, trying to catch his breath and find some words to maneuver himself out of this situation, when 2 people entered the living room. Tyler composed himself and looked up. A young woman quietly followed an older man into the room. When he saw her face, he began to choke all over again. What is she doing here? Why is this woman here? He silently screamed. Episode 176, Perfect Sync. Just after the 2 elderly men introduced their grandchildren to each other, they sat on a luxurious couch facing each other and started talking nonstop. Both of them were talking in a different language, and Tyler was deliberately changing his tone to not come across as someone she may recognize. Although Tyler, who had not worn the mask that Amy and Haley would recognize him in, didn't utter a word. He just looked at the unusually gracious lady standing across from him. What's this, Miss Inappropriate? Are you acting like an innocent lady now? Is it because your grandpa's around? Would you still act like that if I told them what you did to me? As soon as Tyler remembered Amy kissing and biting him the day he had saved her from the men in black suits, he averted his eyes as he grabbed the nape of his neck and looked down at the floor to hide his expression. Damn, why am I still affected by all her mischievous games? He complained silently, not realizing that his current actions were being misunderstood by the lady across from him. This man, is he a movie star I don't know about? How could he look so damn handsome? He's far more attractive than Mr. Ordinary. I think he's the most handsome man I've ever seen. Amy was impressed with the looks of the man her grandfather had just introduced her to. He was the kind of man that turned heads wherever he went. The handsome man had been staring at her for a while, and as soon as Amy made eye contact with him, he looked away. Amy was confused by this. What's this about? Is he already interested in me just by the way I look? Is he really attracted to this innocent, noble-like facade I have to put on? Contemplating that the fiancé her grandfather had picked out for her might already have interest in her should have been a relief. But to Amy, it was the opposite. She was the type of person who lost interest quickly when she didn't have to chase someone. A man who was so easily pleased by first impressions was no fun, and she knew it would be disastrous. Amy knew that her grandfather, the only member of her family who had stayed by her side, had the best intentions. She knew he wanted her to marry into a family more powerful than the Zimmermans, so that her father would have no control over her and couldn't exile her whenever he wanted. Amy had no intention of using the Clarks for her revenge. She only agreed to her grandfather's request to ease his anxiety and nothing more. Amy wanted to stand on her own feet, and what she hated most was the idea of being tied to anything. She simply wanted to be free. Okay, should we start talking about the wedding? James asked. Both Tyler and Amy's eyes widened. Wait, Grandpa, they both said at the same time, surprising themselves and each other. Shut up, the two elderly men said at the same time, causing the four of them to fall silent for a few seconds. Madeline, having just returned to the room, began to chuckle. My, you four seem to be fated to become family, she teased. The comment snapped them all out of it. That's right, Mrs. Clark, Cameron Zimmerman answered as James nodded his agreement. Why don't we give the two of them some time to get to know each other? Mrs. Clark said, and she took the two meddling grandfathers away. But of course, before he left, James reminded Tyler to behave and keep the young lady happy. Tyler sighed and continued to scrutinize Amy. He didn't look amused. Episode 177, A Lady and Miss Inappropriate. What's with the look, Miss Inappropriate? Didn't you say you only talk to handsome men? Well, a handsome man is in front of you, and yet you don't look so pleased. Tyler wished he could say what he was thinking out loud, but he kept his mouth shut. He was waiting for her to speak first. He wanted to see her in action. But he almost choked when she finally did speak. It's obvious you're interested in me, she said with an icy chill in her voice. Tyler could feel his veins popping. Wow, what the heck is this? I swear she treated me better with my mask on. I don't understand this woman. Young lady, don't you think you're getting ahead of yourself? Tyler finally replied when she just nonchalantly raised her brow at him. Oh, so you're saying my observation is wrong? She asked. She gracefully rose to her feet and moved so close to him that her mouth almost touched his ear as she spoke. Are you sure? She whispered seductively, causing Tyler to almost fall into her trap again. Thankfully, he had already anticipated such a move from her. Who would have thought that your innocent facade was actually fake, and you're actually very inappropriate in reality, Tyler said calmly while avoiding touching her. This surprised Amy. She had a flash of memory. Mr. Ordinary had called her inappropriate over and over, and it seemed like an odd choice of words for this man to use. She was also surprised that he hadn't reacted to her closeness at all the way she had anticipated. Wait, was my observation really a mistake? She wondered. You don't really want to marry someone inappropriate like me, do you? She said as she backed off. Tyler smirked mischievously. What's this? Are you saying you were forced into this and you don't really want to marry me? That's exactly what I'm saying. I only agreed to be your fiancé for a while to please my grandfather. But since the two started talking about wedding plans, that makes it a different story. So you're expecting me to back out now too? Obviously. Oh, I see. But tell me first, why don't you want to marry someone of my caliber? He goaded her. Someone of your caliber? Well, yes, you're super gorgeous and super rich, but sorry, my heart already belongs to someone else, she said. Tyler felt a new feeling wash over him. It made him clench his fists. But he was skilled at ignoring his feelings and continued as if nothing had happened. Oh, I wonder what kind of man he is that you would choose him over someone like me. Perhaps he's richer and more gorgeous than me? Well, not really. He's just a guy with an unattractive, ordinary-looking face. And he's not even rich or anything. He's just a bodyguard, she admitted. Tyler choked when the word ordinary came out of her mouth. Episode 178, A Game for Two. Tyler coughed. He was shocked that he had almost let himself be fooled by her statement. A second glance at her, and he could see she wasn't being serious. He cleared his throat and smirked at her. So you're also a good liar, huh? Do I look like someone you could fool easily? Tyler finally asked her as he gave her a displeased glare. But she just threw another mischievous statement at him, throwing him off his game once again. What? You can't accept that I would choose an ordinary-looking guy over you? She asked. This woman. When I have my mask on, she tells me I'm unattractive, yet now that she can see how handsome I am, she's telling me she prefers the more ordinary version of me? Tyler thought in frustration. Tyler was about to lose his patience when an idea came to him. He kept his cool and remained unfazed. You actually think I'll believe such a thing? He asked again, and he stood. You don't have to worry. I will cancel the wedding and engagement as well. Of course, I'll tell him that it was a mutual decision, he assured her as he made to leave the room. But Amy caught his hand to stop him. She hadn't expected him to decide so quickly. Her intention had been to make sure he wouldn't take the idea of marrying her seriously, but she wasn't in a hurry to cancel the engagement. Not when it clearly made her grandfather so happy. She couldn't risk making him unhappy, especially since he was still recovering from an illness. So, in a complete turnaround, Amy bit her lip and clung to his arm. Please don't, she said in her most charming voice. Unfortunately for Amy, Tyler had experience with this tempting version of her, and he was able to anticipate her move. Having watched how she had been so respectful and dutiful in front of her grandfather, he knew she didn't want to disappoint the elderly man. What? Isn't that what you wanted? He asked nonchalantly, completely unaffected by her charm. Amy was taken aback. What's going on? Why is he not reacting at all? Why does it feel like there are two of him? Did I really make a mistake judging this man? Please, my grandpa is just recovering and he might fall ill again if you break the engagement now. Can't we just pretend? Just for a while? And besides, we're just engaged in name only. It's not like we'll get together as lovers or anything, right? She said smoothly, her voice so full of seduction it was hard even for Tyler to resist. Tyler found her amusing, though. The way she had completely changed her approach to him made him want to tease her even more. Fine, I'll consider your request if you beg me some more, he said with a mischievous smile. Amy became immediately annoyed, but forced a sweet laugh as she tightened her grip on his arm. My dear fiancé, why do you need to make me beg? Should you really be treating your fiancé like this? You might make me cry, she said. Instantly, her eyes filled with water. Tyler almost lost control of the situation when she combined the words fiancé with her sweetly seductive voice and her sad eyes. Damn it, she's talented. She definitely shouldn't be underestimated. I'm shocked that even though I knew she's faking it, she can still affect me like this, he cursed silently. My dear fiancé, your tricks won't work on me. Even if you cry in front of me like a baby, I won't budge unless you do what I say and beg me some more. Tyler replied as he patted her head casually. Amy squeezed his arm harder. But before she could make her next move, Amy heard their grandfathers approaching, and she made a quick decision. She let out a mournful cry and wept as though someone she had dearly loved had just died, alarming everyone in the house, especially the grandfathers. Tyler was shocked to the core. He pulled her close and let her bury her face in his chest the moment he saw his grandfather's furious expression. He patted her back like he was consoling her, but lowered his mouth next to her ear. Damn you, are you trying to get me killed? Stop crying right now, damn it, he whispered firmly as he continued caressing her back. In response, she only cried louder. Tyler had reached his limit. His defenses crumbled as he felt the terrifying gazes of his family burrowing into him. Amy? You will pay for daring to do this to me, Tyler vowed in his head. You will regret provoking me like this. Okay, I give up. I give up. Please stop now. I'm sorry. I won't ask you to beg anymore, Tyler finally said as he loosened his arms. As soon as Amy heard his words, a victorious smile lit her face. Promise me that you're not going to cancel the engagement until I say so, she said. Tyler wanted to scream, but he kept it in. If you won't, I'll just cry loudly again until your grandfather will disown you, she interrupted him. When he didn't respond immediately, she began to cry again, but before she could get louder, Tyler suddenly pressed his lips to hers. Episode 179. It's in his kiss. Tyler kissed Amy just to shut her up and nothing more. But strangely, as he felt the warmth and softness of her lips, he almost forgot his purpose in kissing her. It was only due to his excellent self-restraint that he managed to stop before the kiss could go further than he had planned. To protect Brad, Tyler had trained in all sorts of things. He was the perfect bodyguard for Brad, with physical strengths and capabilities that were considered flawless and superhuman. But what made him even more perfect was that he had attained unwavering mental toughness and concentration. He had also trained to deal with the powerful weapons that Amy seemed to have at her disposal. He had learned to keep his head clear and his senses on high alert no matter what situation he was in. So as soon as the kiss was broken, he turned and looked at their grandfathers without even peeking at Amy's reaction to their kiss. She asked for a kiss, but I teased her and jokingly declined. I didn't know that she would get so embarrassed that she would end up crying. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make her cry, he shamelessly confessed, then forced a laugh. His parents and the grandfathers all exchanged a look before smiling at each other in delight, but he could feel Amy's temper ignite at his words. You, she started in a low growl, but before she could get any more out, he hushed her. Shh, this is your fault. You left me with no other choice, he whispered as he continued to lovingly caress her back in comfort. He smirked, congratulating himself for finally finding a way to tame the wild and unpredictable woman in his arms. Or so he had thought, because the next second, she had wrapped her arms around his neck, pulled his face to hers, and kissed him long and hard. Tyler's eyes went wide with surprise. Completely outdoing the simple kiss he had given her moments ago, she worked her tongue into his mouth, causing Tyler's body temperature to skyrocket. But something was triggered in his brain, and some silent alarm in there went off, indicating there was danger in his path. He reflexively wrapped his hands around her wrists and slowly removed them from his neck before pulling away from her. He kept hold of her wrists as he looked at her. His reaction made Amy smile mysteriously at him. She had kissed him so passionately to embarrass him and show him what a real kiss was. And secretly, it was also because as soon as his lips had touched hers, she had felt the same surge she had when she had kissed Mr. Ordinary. This puzzled her, and she became very curious about it. You little, he trailed off. How could you be so shameless in front of our families? He began, but just as he had done to her, she wouldn't let him finish. Shh, this is your fault. You left me with no other choice, she softly said, repeating the exact words he had used on her. Then she planted her lips on his to see if she really had felt the spark she got when she kissed Mr. Ordinary. Meanwhile, the two grandfathers exchanged awkward but delighted looks watching their grandchildren kiss shamelessly in front of them. My grandson isn't usually that shameless, and he isn't a playboy at all. He is actually a gentleman, and rest assured he never mistreats women. I think this demonstrates just how much he likes your granddaughter, James whispered to Cameron as he chuckled softly. Yes, of course, I know your grandson is a good young man. And actually, my granddaughter isn't usually that shameless either. She's an innocent young lady, and she's shy with men. I think it's safe to say she really likes her grandson as well, Cameron whispered back. They were both delighted with how quickly their plan was unfolding. Episode 180, Testing the Limits. My, I think we have to leave them alone for a while. Let's give them more time to spend getting to know each other some more, okay? Madeline said. The older men nodded, and they all retreated to the dining room, leaving the young couple to sort out their feelings. One was struggling to keep his head straight, and the other was using their kiss to figure out what it was about this man that made her think of another man. As the kiss went on, Tyler struggled to force himself to pull away again. He was mystified. This kiss was definitely different from the ones he had had from women while he was practicing during and after his training. He felt as though Amy was the most powerful and potent of any woman he had ever kissed. He was sure her kiss was more lethal than any female spy he had ever encountered. Of all people, who would have guessed it would be this woman to make me struggle, he wondered. He knew that he had no reason to worry. She was no spy or threat to him. But he wanted to test his limits against someone who affected him as much as she did. He had no idea that he would be completely defeated by her, in a matter of seconds. He had thought that nothing could break his willpower, that he was completely immune to female charm, but he finally gave in to Amy. He released her hands and kissed her back. Just as he was going under, she pulled away without warning. Tyler nearly lost it. This woman, you pushed me to my limit, then pull away? Are you toying with me? And what the hell is that look on your face? He screamed in his head. The expression on Amy's face was thoughtful. Tyler reacted quickly, pushing her down onto the couch. A shocked look crossed her face. Tyler straddled her and smiled mischievously at her surprise. Why stop when we're almost at the good part? He shamelessly asked. Amy was struck dumb for a few seconds, but then smirked at him in disbelief. What, you wanted to go all the way, right here, right now? Mr. Handsome, you're much more shameless than I, huh? She nonchalantly replied, looking calm and collected. Her speech had flustered him, but he kept his cool outwardly. This woman is so shameless, he complained silently again. Shameless? It's not like people are watching, though. Besides, aren't you the shameless, inappropriate one? This isn't a big deal for you, right? He retorted calmly, causing her brow to raise before she turned her head toward the spot where their grandfathers had been standing, surprised to see that they were no longer there. She hadn't realized that Tyler had sensed them leaving, or else he wouldn't have dared such a bold move. Realizing they were alone, she turned her face back to Tyler. So, while I'm kissing him deeply, he still manages to notice everything around him? How can he do that? How can that be possible? Does this mean my kisses don't affect him at all? And no matter how dirty I tried to talk to him, he never even blushed. Is he seriously not affected by me? Amy was beyond frustrated with this man. Well, I wonder if you really have the guts to go all the way right here, right now, she said. In retaliation, she showed him her own mischievous smirk. Another vein popped on Tyler's neck. Episode 181, Red Lipstick. Amy kept watching Tyler. She noticed and marveled at every exquisite detail of his face. His eyes were cold, but they were surrounded by long, beautiful lashes. She was tempted to pluck one to see if it was real. As she gazed into his eyes, she noticed a striking similarity to Mr. Ordinary's eyes. She had been bewildered by the similarity in their voices, even though they were speaking a different language. But she had dismissed it as a coincidence. Her confusion had returned after she had kissed both of them. She had experienced the exact same sensations with them. As she stared into his eyes, her confusion grew. The only difference between the two men was their appearance. Mr. Ordinary might earn 5 points at best, but Mr. Handsome was a perfect 10. Amy's curiosity overwhelmed her. She wanted to see what Mr. Handsome would do with her so that she could compare his behavior to Mr. Ordinary's. As she moved closer and waited for him to make a move, she thought, if he won't even kiss or touch me like Mr. Ordinary did the last time I saw him, then... Her thought was interrupted by Mr. Handsome turning away from her. What's wrong? Are you scared? She teased as a taunting smile flashed across her face. He cringed and leaned toward her. Just as their lips were about to touch, he paused. Amy smiled again, but her smile faded when he pressed his lips to her forehead. She was confused, but before she could say anything, he asked her a question. Why aren't you wearing your usual makeup today? She knitted her brows. What the? Look, maybe nobody has told you this before, but without your red lipstick, you look like a little girl, he said. Huh? She muttered. Sorry, but I'm not into minors. The guilt would overwhelm me. Behave yourself. Come and see me again when you've grown up a little, okay? He tousled her hair as if she were a child, leaving her stunned and speechless. He sat up on the couch and moved away from her, but she moved closer. She placed her hands on his face and started pinching it. What the? Tell me the truth, she cried. You're Mr. Ordinary, aren't you? The reason your face is so handsome is because it's a mask. Let me peel it off of you, you despicable little man. She tugged at his skin, scrutinizing every nook and cranny of his face and neck to see where the mask was attached. What? Tyler thought. She thinks I'm wearing a mask. Does she seriously think that the boring face is my real one? Why can't she believe that I'm really this handsome? Episode 182, Polar Opposites. Amy eventually figured out that he wasn't wearing a mask. She stopped tugging at his face and stared at him in confusion. There's no mask? She thought. Tyler sighed and tousled her hair again. Stop messing around and... How did you know about my red lipstick? She asked. I heard my grandfather talking about you, so I looked you up online, he said. Her eyes narrowed, but he kept talking. Okay, you little inappropriate woman. If you tell me why you're against the engagement, I'll consider your request.
I already told you I'm in love with someone else,
she said. She kept her answer brief as her confusion grew.
Mr. Ordinary calls me Miss Inappropriate. Do these guys know each other?
What's going on? She wondered. He stood up to leave, but she grabbed his hand. Okay, I'll tell you, but you have to promise me first, she said. Noticing that she looked unusually serious, Tyler said, Okay, you have my word. Amy let go of his hand and leaned back on the couch.
I don't want to be tied down, she said. I just want to be free to live my own life.
Her honesty and intensity made him smile involuntarily. He sighed and thought, That's it? You just want independence? Impressive, Miss Inappropriate. I see. Don't worry. I won't push the issue if you're not ready. You can have your independence. He patted her head, smiled, and walked away, leaving her speechless. You and I are polar opposites, Miss Inappropriate. I'm already tied down, but you don't need to be. I'll make sure you can fly freely, he thought, feeling relieved and satisfied. He had known for a long time that his adoptive family would start nagging him since they couldn't nag Brad. Since the opportunity to settle down had come earlier than he had expected, he didn't know what he would have done if Amy had turned out to be too clingy for him. He would have had to deny his parents' wishes. He was grateful that his fiancée was so independent and wasn't just an obedient robot. But as long as Brad was still in danger, he couldn't afford to be distracted. As soon as Tyler stepped out of the living room, he felt sweat forming on his forehead. He was hit by Brad's cold aura and saw him standing impatiently by the door. Oh, come on. You only had to wait a few minutes, he sighed. He began, wanting to know if Brad had said goodbye to their parents, but he had already started heading out the door. Shrugging, Tyler followed him out, and they got in the car and left the old castle. As the car sped toward the airport, Tyler called their grandfather to tell him that they had left. He listened patiently to a few minutes of nagging and then hung up. Brad, can you hurry up and make a baby? If you don't, they'll just keep on bugging me, he said. After a lengthy silence, his companion spoke.
Why? Haven't you sorted things out yet?
Tyler sighed. I guess I got lucky this time. Amy doesn't want to be tied down, so everything turned out okay.
Good for you.
I don't need that. All I want to hear from you is that Haley is pregnant, okay? The gift shop. Tyler thought about Haley as he stared out the window on the ride back from the airport. She had asked him to make sure they arrived at Gray Mansion after dark, because she had planned a surprise for Brad. He had assured her that they would not arrive until night had fallen, but he had not foreseen Brad's impatience. He was so intent on getting home that nothing would distract him. Okay, what now? Think. How can I delay us? Tyler wondered anxiously, banging his head on the window. He looked up, saw the sun shining brightly overhead, and sighed. He checked his watch and cringed. The sun wouldn't set for 2 more hours. Sorry, Miss Haley, but I failed you this time. I can't handle him today, he thought. Then he saw something that he thought might just save the day. They were approaching a gift shop. He turned to Brad, who hadn't said a word since they had left the castle. Hey, he said, did you get anything for Haley, like a gift or souvenir? Brad turned toward him with knitted brows. He continued, I mean, you don't have to, but she might think you don't care about her or that she doesn't even matter enough for you to bring her. That's not true, Brad said harshly. Yeah, I know, Tyler said, smiling victoriously. But you should make sure that she knows. Tyler got Brad to put on his Brad 2 mask and then followed him into the gift shop, smiling blissfully at the thought of how much time they might spend shopping. Well, Miss Haley, it looks like I can still be of some use to you. You're welcome, and I accept whatever reward you might, he thought, but Brad's impatience brought him back to reality. Brad had never personally chosen a gift for anyone before, not even his family. He had never gone into a gift shop before. Tyler had always been in charge of gifts since Brad had never cared about such trivial things. He needed help, so he turned to Tyler. What should I get for her? He asked, looking as helpless as a lost puppy. Tyler knew how completely clueless he was. He sighed and said, just choose something you know she'll like. A few shop assistants approached, carrying jewelry, dresses, purses, and shoes, which were their most popular items for women. They took turns displaying their goods. Brad listened quietly to their enthusiastic explanations, but said nothing. They asked him if he had a special lady in mind, but he remained silent. His eyes were glued to the various items that they were showing him. Sensing that Brad wasn't going to respond to any of the assistants, Tyler whispered, just pick one. Pick the prettiest thing that you see.
The prettiest thing that I see?
Brad repeated. Tyler nodded impatiently.
But the prettiest thing that I see is my wife,
he said with simplicity and sincerity that silenced everyone around him. All eyes turned to him. Episode 184, Another Ceremony. Time stood still inside the gift shop as everyone fell silent. Tyler broke the silence with a small cough. Everyone started whispering at once, expressing their wonder and admiration. Tyler and Brad overheard part of the conversation.
Did you hear that? That's so sweet.
Yeah, too bad he's married.
Married? I don't think so.
But he just mentioned his wife.
Yeah, but look at his finger. There's no ring.
People forget to wear them sometimes. But even if he's not married, and even though he's gorgeous, just forget it. Have you noticed how hard it is to look at him for too long? He's intimidating.
Yeah, I've noticed. It's like he's a king and we're servants who need to bow our heads when he passes by.
Brad heard everything, but most of the words were nothing more than background noise, like the sound of rain. One phrase caught his attention, though, and he repeated it to himself.
There's no ring. There's no ring.
He stared at his finger for several seconds and then turned to Tyler.
Why don't Haley and I have wedding rings?
He asked. Tyler looked around and saw everyone start whispering again as they tried to make sense of what they had just heard. He stepped closer and whispered, You do realize that we're in a public place, right? Brad frowned and said,
So?
Everyone's talking about you.
Since when has that mattered? Just answer the question,
Brad said sternly. Tyler sighed and thought back to a conversation in their childhood. He had asked Brad why he didn't care about anything, and Brad had replied that that's just how he was. Looking at his companion, who was still staring at his finger, he thought, You've been different recently, so I forgot. But I guess you're only different around Haley. You're still cold to everyone else. Do you really want me to say it out loud here? He asked, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the shop to hear. The small crowd watched them expectantly.
Don't make me repeat myself,
was the reply. Tyler sighed. Fine. You don't have wedding rings because you didn't care about them when you got married. You didn't even turn up to your own wedding, remember? You just signed the certificate. Everyone gasped and started whispering again. Brad felt like he had been struck by lightning.
It's my fault?
He asked, looking again at his finger. He clenched his fist and blazed with anger. The crowd, not knowing that his anger was directed at himself, scattered. Tyler tried to console him. Well, you were complete strangers at the time, so it's not as bad as... Brad cut him off.
How could I make up for it?
He asked with childlike sincerity that left his companion speechless. When there was no response, he continued.
I want us to have rings.
Tyler smiled and placed a hand on Brad's shoulder. Okay, then have another ceremony. Renew your vows. Episode 185, Tell Her. Brad beamed with joy when he realized that he could fix his mistake. His eyes glimmered, but the glimmer faded as he thought more about Tyler's suggestion. He asked,
What if she doesn't want to?
Tyler rested his chin in his hand. It's possible. Brad scowled. He looked like he wanted to hurt someone. Most likely himself. He thought back to how inconsiderate he had been to her when they had first met. He remembered his cold looks, actions, and words, including the contract he had forced her to follow. His chest constricted and he wished that he could go back in time and do things differently. Looking helpless, he asked,
What should I do?
Tyler coughed. Brad hadn't requested help before, and he hadn't been so helpless since the night of their escape. Wow, you didn't even look this scared when your life was in danger. Are you really that worried that Haley won't want to do it? He thought. Well, he said, stalling for time so that he could come up with an idea. After a few seconds, he continued. Have you told her that you're in love with her?
Do I have to?
Brad asked. How am I supposed to help you when you're like this?
But actions speak louder than words. She'll know by the way I treat her that I'm in love with her,
Brad said earnestly. Tyler sighed and shook his head. I know you're new at this, he said, and there is some truth to what you said, but words matter. She might misinterpret your actions. Maybe you're only being nice to her so that she'll have your child. See? If you don't tell her, she won't know for sure. And what about you? Can you guess her feelings from her actions? Yeah, you can tell that she likes you, but are you sure that she loves you? If she hasn't said those words? Brad froze. Episode 186, The Perfect Gift. Tyler sighed. Okay, forget about renewing your vows for now. The first thing you need to do is tell her you love her. After Brad nodded silently, he continued. Okay, now choose a gift so we can go. Pick something that you think she'll like. He sounded like a teacher giving instructions to a student, and he seemed to be enjoying the opportunity to tell his boss what to do.
Something I think she'll like,
Brad repeated. He scanned his memories and came up with flowers, movies, cookies, the moon, bunny masks, the sun, cat stickers, and apples. He realized that those things had all become precious to him since they reminded him of her. He took another look around the gift shop.
I don't think I'll find anything here,
he said as he headed toward the door. He stopped when something caught his attention. In the corner of the shop, a big, fluffy white teddy bear was on display. He scowled and his coldness returned. Ever since Haley had told him that she slept with a teddy bear when he was away, he had thought of the stuffed toys as enemies. He wanted to destroy every teddy bear on the planet. Then it occurred to him that she had been happy snuggling with the bear. So he forced himself to calm down.
She likes them, so just leave them alone,
he told himself. He continued toward the door, but he stopped again when an image of Haley's radiant smile as she hugged the teddy bear flashed through his mind. He stared coldly at the bear, but then walked over to it and picked it up. He sighed and thought,
I shouldn't hate the things that she likes. Maybe I should learn to like them.
He gave the bear to Tyler, who grinned and said, You're getting better. You know how to make her happy. When they left the gift shop, it was dark outside. Are you sure you don't want to hold it? Tyler asked as they walked toward the car. When he got no response, he smiled and said, She'll probably cuddle with it when you give it to her, and if it's got my smell on it, then... Before he could finish his sentence, Brad had snatched the teddy bear from him. He laughed and said, Don't set it down on the seat or it'll smell like the car. I think you should cuddle with it so that it smells like you. That way, she'll think of you every time she hugs it. Brad knitted his brows but followed Tyler's advice. He wrapped his arms around the bear. He didn't notice Tyler shaking with suppressed laughter at the image of an icy cold man sitting with a fluffy white teddy bear in his lap. Episode 187. A special meaning. They arrived at Gray Mansion and Brad jumped out of the car. Being away from Haley for 3 weeks had been torture. He was so glad to be home that he forgot about the giant teddy bear in his arms. When he got closer to the door, he knitted his brows. There weren't many lights on, and the living room was dark. Since Haley had moved in, he had gotten used to the house being brightly lit. Something felt wrong, so he walked faster. Tyler got out of the car and followed Brad, but he stopped when he felt someone grab him from behind. He turned around and glared. Why are you trying to stop me, Leonard? He asked with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Leonard laughed nervously. Stay there. Don't make this hard for me. Tyler frowned. Are you telling me what to do? Remember who's the boss. Of course. Brad, and now Miss Haley, and you. Leonard stepped back, aware of how terrifying Tyler could be. Tyler sighed and his anger disappeared. Yeah, I guess your ranking makes sense. He laughed and Leonard breathed a sigh of relief before explaining why he had detained his boss. Miss Haley told me not to let you in. She said Brad is the only one allowed. Tyler scratched his head and said, Right. Since she outranks me, I guess I had better do what she wants. He walked back to the car, smiling mischievously, as though he had a secret plan. Brad, who had entered Gray Mansion while Leonard was restraining Tyler, was about to go into the living room when something on the floor caught his attention. He stared at it for a few seconds and then bent down to pick it up. His eyes widened as he recognized the red chrysanthemum, and his heart began fluttering. He was stunned and couldn't understand the feelings that were forming inside him. When Haley had started sending him flowers, he had looked them up to try to understand the messages they conveyed. He had learned a lot about the language of flowers, and he had memorized an entire book. His mind flashed back to the page he had read about moss roses and their meaning, and the words burned themselves into his brain. Red chrysanthemums are a symbol of love. Brad felt like he was living in a fairy tale. He slowly recovered from the shock, but his heart was still beating wildly. He felt an overwhelming desire to hug and kiss his wife. He noticed a path had been lit with tea-light candles, so he followed it, carrying the teddy bear in one hand and the red chrysanthemum in the other. As impatient as he was to see Haley, he stopped again when he saw another flower on the floor. He stared at it for a few seconds before picking it up. It was a red camellia. He visualized the page that he had read. Red camellias express passion and romance. Haley's face appeared in his mind, and he heard her sweet voice telling him about the flower. He blushed as another wave of emotions hit him, and he needed a few minutes to recover before he could move again. He had only taken a few steps before he stopped for the third time. He saw yet another flower, a white lily. His eyes glimmered as he imagined Haley reading to him. White lilies signify joy. Giving them indicates a strong desire to be together. Brad smiled and thought, I should be telling that to you. He was still overcome with emotion, and he thought about how much his life had changed since he had met her. His former self, who hadn't cared about, wanted, or felt anything, had slowly disappeared. She had stirred emotions in him that he hadn't known existed. Small things that his old self ignored, like the flowers in his hands, had become precious. Flowers had been meaningless to him. They bloomed and died. There was nothing more to them. Because of Haley, though, he had started noticing and appreciating them, even if he just saw them along a road. He was happy about the short-lived beauty they brought to a harsh, cruel world. Everything had started to change when she had appeared in his life. She was his salvation. She had touched his cold soul and made him feel alive and human again. She had opened his eyes and filled the void within him. She had melted his frozen heart. As Brad walked, his heart was fluttering, but he was also worried. He knew Haley was everything he needed to feel like himself again, but the truth about his life, that was his biggest secret. Brad never thought very highly of himself. He had a king-like aura, and his loyal subjects always had his back. But Haley had changed him. His whole life flashed before his eyes, and no matter how traumatic his past was, the only thing that mattered to him at this moment was Haley. He loved her. He knew it. But he was in a constant state of panic, thinking of what she would do if she found out the truth about him. Did she love him? Would she love him? He wished Tyler was with him right now to reason with, to speak to argue with, to tell him what to do. But there he was, walking alone on a journey that would lead him to the love of his life, only probably to have her taken away. That thought made him shudder. The prospect of Haley being taken away from him actually made Brad feel the thing he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Episode 189. Waiting nervously. Brad kept walking, and he could see that the path ended in the courtyard, which was lit up. His heart raced at the thought of finally seeing his wife. Before he got to the courtyard, though, he stopped for the fourth time when he saw another flower. The first 3 flowers had weakened his knees, but this one delivered a knockout blow. He could barely contain his emotions. His grip on the teddy bear tightened, and he felt like his heart might burst. He picked up the lily of the valley and once again heard his wife's voice reading from his book. When you give a lily of the valley, you are saying that someone has made you complete. When he realized that she was telling him everything he wanted to tell her, he got an idea. He took out his phone and sent a short message. Haley waited in the gazebo, which twinkled with romantic decor. She was dressed in white with her dark hair in a side braid, and she looked angelic. She bit her lip nervously. She had received a message from Leonard telling her that Brad had entered the house, but he seemed to be taking his time finding his way to the gazebo. The longer she waited, the more nervous she became. She hadn't expected it to be so hard to tell Brad how she felt. Her heart had been pounding since she had found out he was back. Expressing her feelings was the hardest thing she had ever done, not because it was her first time doing it, but because she was afraid of what would happen. She worried that he would change, and she knew there was a chance that he would reject her. She had done a lot of thinking in the 3 weeks that he had been gone. She had realized how much he meant to her. When he was away, her days felt incomplete. She had realized that she wanted to keep him in her arms forevermore, so she had decided to tell him that she loved him, even though she didn't know how he would respond. As she waited for him in the gazebo, she thought about what she had agreed to when she married him. She remembered, but she still wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to expose herself so that he could see her soul, and she hoped that he would show her just a little bit more of himself. Haley had never felt this way before. Hers and Brad's marriage was indeed a marriage of convenience, one she had gotten into just for Owen and their well-being. Only a little time had passed, but she felt like she knew Brad from lifetimes ago. She felt like the puzzle of her soul that was missing had finally been found. She knew there was a secret about Brad that she wasn't aware of. Yet, that didn't scare her as much as the thought of not being with him did. As she waited for him to arrive, her heart beat with a rhythm she had never felt before. There was a fire burning within her, and the only person who could seem to tame it was Brad. She couldn't wait for him to touch her, embrace her, kiss her. The thought of it only made her want him even more. The final move. When Brad was just a few steps away from the courtyard, he stopped and looked at everything he was carrying. He had a large, fluffy teddy bear in one hand and several flowers in the other. He set the bear down on a small table and then stepped into the courtyard. There were candles all around it, some of them forming another path that guided him toward the gazebo. Brad was amazed as he looked around. What had been his training ground had been completely transformed. Knowing that Haley was behind the transformation, he wanted to freeze the image in his mind. Because of her, the courtyard and gazebo had become very special places for him. As impressed as he was with her decorations, he couldn't bear to waste another second just looking at everything. He quickly approached the gazebo, halting when he saw her silhouette. His eyes widened. The angel waiting quietly in the gazebo rendered him speechless. He took in her dress, her hair, her radiant smile, her mesmerizing eyes, her nose, and her lips. Time froze and everything outside the gazebo disappeared. The only thing that he could see was her. He watched her as she stood motionless. She gazed back at him, taking his breath away. He slowly shuffled closer, never averting his eyes. She stood rooted to the spot, suppressing the desire to run up to him and throw her arms around him. Instead, she quietly waited for him, counting every step that he took. Time had frozen for her too, so he moved in slow motion. She met his gaze, and they looked at each other with intense love and longing. When Brad was just one step away from her, he stopped again, noticing that he had stepped on something. Haley looked to the ground, so he followed her gaze. He saw what she was looking at. He stood still for a moment before slowly bending his knees and kneeling in front of her as gracefully as a prince. He picked up the red tulip and raised his eyes to look at her. As he was about to stand again, she reached out her hand. He froze, his eyes glued to what she was holding. She had a single red rose. His heart pounded. He knew the meaning of the rose, and he knew that the tulip meant the same thing. His emotions were spinning out of control, and he felt like he was on the verge of shutting down completely. A second later, as her final move, she opened her mouth and expressed the meaning of the last two flowers. I love you. Episode 191. Fear of Rejection. I love you, Haley finally said, her eyes burning with intense emotions. Honesty, sincerity, loyalty, but above all, love. She only uttered 3 words, but those 3 magic words were all she needed to say. She had poured all her heart into those words as her ultimate declaration of her feelings. Her heart was beating wildly as she held her breath, as she waited for the reaction of the man crouched down in front of her. Haley sensed that her husband was shocked, and she felt even more nervous when he just froze in position while his eyes were locked on hers, those beautiful, otherworldly eyes glimmering like precious gems. After what seemed like forever, Brad finally moved. He stood up and slowly looked directly into her eyes. And just then, she glimpsed a flicker of another emotion reflected in his eyes. It was as if his surprise from a moment ago had turned suddenly into anxiety. She couldn't understand why, but she felt as though her heart were being twisted because of his unbearably forlorn expression. She wanted to speak out and ask him what was wrong. She wanted to know why he was suddenly looking at her in that way, just after she had told him that she loved him. But she became tongue-tied and unable to utter a single word. She was cloaked in apprehension, and the only thought racing through her mind was fear that he was about to reject her. She bit her lip, and her grip on the rose tightened when, out of nowhere, the man in front of her finally spoke. He began, and she searched his face anxiously for clues of how he felt in an attempt to prepare herself. His eyes still shone with a kind of melancholy gaze, and she did not read this as a good sign. If I tell you I'm not a good person, would you still say that you love me? He continued in a small voice full of despair, and Haley's eyes widened. When she heard those words, she instantly understood his sadness was not because he intended to reject her. She realized that he was anxious that her feelings might change once she knew who he was. As this thought crossed her mind, she took a deep breath and smiled. You're a good person, and I will still love you regardless. she said, her voice full of love and sincerity, as she looked back at him with her usual unbreakable and determined gaze. Brad fell silent for a few seconds before he began talking again. I'm a dangerous person. That's the reason I won't show you my face or reveal my identity to you, he explained. His eyes remained as sad as ever, and it was causing her pain. She stood on tiptoe, raised her hand, and reached out to gently caress his hair before she replied with a gentle, reassuring voice. You're not dangerous to me at all, but even if you are, I will still love you, she answered solemnly, and then her face lit with a warm smile. He absorbed her every word, was reassured by her tender smile, and felt her comforting and gentle touches. She had continued to display her affection despite everything he had revealed to her, which triggered inexplicable feelings of warmth that he had never experienced before. He began to think she really was an angel that had descended from the heavens to save him. He had never expected the reactions and responses she had provided, and he had never meant to tell her anything to discourage or test her. He had simply wanted to open his heart and reveal his past self slowly, despite the unbearable fear of losing her. He had decided that he must. He had no choice. Episode 192, The Struggle to Explain. Brad was struggling to fight his intense desire to hold her tight, but he had told himself it was too early to celebrate. They had a long way to go yet. He knew that what he had revealed already were words that no one could just accept easily. They were words that it had been difficult for him to say. Throughout his entire life, Brad had never bothered explaining himself to anyone. He hadn't cared before what people thought about him. He had hated the idea of reasoning with people just to try to make them understand. That was why he had grown so dependent on Tyler's social skills. And now, when he needed to speak for himself, he did not know how to express himself. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to explain, and he wanted Haley to understand his reasons why. He deeply cared about her reaction, and that was why, for a long time now, he had dreamed of the day he could finally reveal these things to her. But just thinking about it made him aware of how difficult it was going to be. The thought of losing her the moment he revealed who he was had been a source of great torture to him. There were occasions when he had believed that the risk of losing her was so great that the day he told her his story might never come because he would not have the courage to take that risk. But now it was actually happening. Brad didn't know why, but as he looked into her eyes, the words he thought would never come just poured out of his mouth. He felt as though her comforting gaze was urging him to forget about his fear and just confess everything. So he continued to speak. Even if I tell you that the whole world sees me as the most evil and notorious criminal, would you still say you love me? He asked. Haley fell silent for a while. She looked at him as she tried to figure out whether he was just asking a what-if question or not. But as she scrutinized his expression, she concluded that what he appeared to be asking was honest and genuine. When she remembered that since the day they had met, Brad had never once lied to her, she realized it was not a hypothetical question. She swallowed and thought for a second about how to react. But after a while, deep inside, she knew that her love for him would never waver, no matter what he told her. I believe someone might have framed you, she said almost without thinking, clenching her fist tightly. He was so stunned by her reply that he couldn't speak. But what made you say that? What makes you think that I was framed? He asked hesitantly. She raised her voice and shook her head. I don't know. You're my adorable husband. You're not a notorious criminal. I know someone must have framed you, or if you've done anything bad, someone must have forced you. I refuse to believe you're a notorious criminal. It can't be true. She was almost shouting as she couldn't explain why she suddenly felt so enraged. She hadn't intended to deny the facts or be blinded by love, but she truly believed from the bottom of her heart that Brad was a good person. She just didn't believe that he could be wicked or evil, no matter how cold he appeared sometimes. But what he said next made Haley feel as though the extent of her love for him was being tested to its very core. In the past, I have killed people, he said quietly, and a long silence followed this revelation. It was some time before Haley was able to move again. When she did, she bit her lower lip hard. She stared at her husband's honest eyes again, and she didn't understand why, but she wanted to cry. It was as if his eyes reflected a painful past she still knew nothing about. Whatever you did, I believe you had your reasons. You may have been forced to do things, or you had to defend or save yourself or others, she said, and tears began to well up in her eyes. She then tugged his shirt as she continued. And it's all in the past, right? What you did in the past has nothing to do with my feelings for you, even if... She paused as the words caught in her throat. Even if you tell me that you're a real monster, I will still love you. Do you understand? She said, and then the tears began to fall from her eyes. Brad could finally take no more. As soon as he saw her tears streaming down her face, he took his wife in his arms and held her close and as tightly as he could. He was still reeling from the meaning of her words, but when he saw her cry, saw her hurting, he felt a pain he couldn't describe. I'm sorry. Please don't cry, he said helplessly as he kept rubbing her back until she pulled away from him. She wiped her tears and looked at him with a solemn gaze. Brad, tell me, how do you feel about me? She asked bravely. I want your honest answer. But just then, the sound of a chopper could be heard approaching, getting louder as it got closer. Before they knew it, the chopper was above them. The strong wind created by its spinning blades extinguished the flame of every single one of the candles that surrounded them. A second later, 2 spotlights from the mansion's roof were switched on and lit the 2 figures in the courtyard. While Haley was still confused by what was happening, he suddenly took her hand. He spun her around toward him, and his eyes glimmered when he finally opened his mouth to speak. Haley, this is my answer, he said, and countless flowers began to fall from the sky like rain. Episode 193, Say It with Flowers. A few minutes before, just as Tyler had just been about to sneak away from Leonard to satisfy his empty stomach, he had received an urgent message from Brad. Ambrosias, jonquils, red roses, make it rain. Now. As soon as he had received those instructions, Tyler had panicked, particularly when he read the final word. He knew he didn't have much time and he could have easily fainted with the stress, but he knew how important this was to Brad, and if he failed to deliver, the fallout would be devastating. For Tyler, anyway. So when Tyler had received this message, he had known he was up against the clock. He had no time to waste if he was going to organize what Brad had requested. He had immediately set about giving out orders. First, he had instructed Leonard to prepare the spotlights on the rooftop, and then he had contacted the other men needed to provide the flowers and man the chopper. Even in the middle of all the panic, Tyler had still taken the time to smile. He had understood the meaning of the flowers Brad had requested, and he had also had a picture in his mind of what was happening between Brad and Haley when he had received his orders. Everything had been prepared with super fast efficiency. When Tyler had been satisfied that everything was in place and the performance had been about to begin, he disappeared, taking his camera phone to capture the moment. Then finally, the chopper had arrived, and it had started raining flowers. Haley couldn't believe her eyes as the flowers fell like rain over them. She had never seen anything as spectacular as this, and it was the last thing she had expected to see. She had never dreamed of anything so beautiful. Watching the flowers fall to the ground made her look around in wonder and disbelief, and an enchanting smile spread across her beautiful face. The couple in the courtyard, a woman in white and a man in black, under a spotlight, while countless flowers rained over them, was a vision so breathtakingly perfect that the entire scene looked like a picture taken straight from a book of fairy tales. Haley was obviously caught completely unawares by Brad's counterattack. She realized that he had overshadowed her declaration of love with his own response, and it rendered her speechless. She was so mesmerized that it took her a while to notice the careful detail woven into the gesture. There were 3 kinds of flowers falling over them. Ambrosias meant, your love is reciprocated. Jonquils meant, affection returned. Red roses simply meant love. Haley brought her hands to her mouth as soon as she saw these flowers and gazed at Brad. They looked so deeply into each other's eyes that it was as if they were silently communicating until the chopper above them turned around to leave. The fallen flowers now covered almost every inch of the courtyard like a beautiful, magical carpet. Haley looked at the flower Brad now held in his hand. He moved a step closer to her before he stretched out his hand and presented her with the full-bloom red rose, his eyes overflowing with love and sincerity. I love you, he said as his ears and neck turned red. And as soon as he said those words, Haley's tears began to fall once again before she threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. They remained locked tightly in each other's arms, as though they had been separated for years. Brad, she began while her face was still buried in his chest. Brad, I want to hear you say it again. She slowly pulled away and took his face in her hands, and he blushed again. Brad didn't know why, but saying those 3 words was harder than he had ever thought possible. However, as it was his wife's desire, he said them again. I love you, Haley. he declared once more, and before she could smile, he pulled her toward him and kissed her. Episode 194, The Heavens Opened. The couple stood kissing passionately in the middle of the courtyard, under a soft spotlight, surrounded by a carpet of flowers. Their lips gently came together slowly and softly, their hearts fluttering wildly. It was such a memorable kiss that neither would be able to find the right words, even to begin to describe it. As they kissed, they felt the world around them had disappeared. Time stood still, and they were alone, soaring above the clouds. It even seemed as if their hearts were beating as one. The kiss obliterated every thought and all their worries. All they had was the feeling that they had just stepped through the door to a new beginning, just for them, together, against the world. After the spellbinding revelations contained in that magical kiss, Brad pulled back slightly to gaze at Haley, so they could both catch their breath. He was about to kiss her again when raindrops began to fall. He leaned in toward her and considered ignoring the falling rain, but the gentle drops turned into a downpour within seconds, so he pulled her underneath the gazebo. They turned to look at each other again as soon as they were beneath the shelter, their faces still blazing red following the unforgettable kiss they had shared just moments before. They continued to feel the splash of the heavy rain from under the shelter of the gazebo. Brad then noticed the table Haley had prepared for their romantic dinner, and he frowned. When she saw his expression, she chuckled softly. "It's all right. We can always have our romantic dinner another time. And the food is still in the house, so it's fine," she said as she smiled sweetly. Brad simply nodded in response. "Yes, you're right," he agreed, and they continued to stare deeply into each other's eyes. As they sheltered from the torrential rain, the wind began to blow the rain toward them. They could hear the trees rustling as the wind grew stronger. Haley had been about to speak, but the words remained in her throat as Brad pulled her in his arms to shield her with his body from the rain. Her heart began to race wildly again. "Don't worry, it's fine," she said, but Brad shook his head. "No, it's not. What if you catch a cold?" he asked, and she just chuckled softly. "I'm not that delicate, okay? And even if I do catch a cold, it's just a cold. And I will get over it," she said. She then stood on tiptoe, reached up to his head, and ruffled his hair. "But I mind. I don't want you to get sick," he said, gazing at her with a hint of worry in his eyes. When she heard those words, she looked at him and hugged him tightly. Because he was behaving adorably once again, she couldn't resist the urge to cuddle and squeeze him. She raised her hand to pinch his cheek, but stopped as she remembered he was wearing a mask. Then she felt another strong gust of wind, and she shivered. "What's going on? Why has the weather suddenly turned?" she wondered. Brad's back was already soaking wet. The rain just kept on getting heavier, and the wind just kept getting stronger. Brad decided they should go back inside the house. He was about to call Tyler to bring them an umbrella when he saw him approaching from the house. Tyler handed Brad the umbrella and smiled mischievously. The gods might have misunderstood your make it rain message, Brad," he said when Brad just gazed at him blankly. "Well, it looks as if even the heavens are pretty jealous of the romance you two lovebirds have," he continued. But Haley and Brad just looked at Tyler in confusion. Episode 195, A Gift. Brad, Haley, and Tyler were all soaked through by the time they reached the living room. "This storm looked like it might be a pretty strong one," Tyler remarked when Haley's eyes opened wide in surprise. "What? There's a storm?" she asked. She usually checked the weather forecast every day, but she had failed to watch that day's forecast because she had been busy with her preparations. But when she had watched the forecast the day before, the approaching storm had been headed in another direction, so she was surprised by what Tyler said. "Yes, it changed course last night, and it's a heavy storm," Tyler replied. Haley was stunned. She realized how lucky she was that the storm hadn't come earlier. Otherwise, who knows what might have happened. "Thank God. I really feel lucky today," she sighed in relief. While Haley silently expressed her gratitude, Brad noticed her dress was dripping wet, and he immediately placed a coat around her shoulders. "Are you all right? I think you should go and change out of those wet clothes," he said with a worried look. Haley just smiled at his thoughtfulness. "I'm fine, really, but okay. I'll go and get changed," she said, and she ran toward the stairs. Brad watched her back until she disappeared from sight before he went straight to his study. Tyler followed close behind. Brad and Haley went through to the dining room a short while later, where a table for two had already been set up and decorated with romantic candles, and they enjoyed a quiet dinner together. Even though Brad was as quiet as he usually was, Haley felt that there had been a huge shift. She felt that the distance between them had been bridged and was happy that their relationship was finally becoming real. She was also glad that Brad felt the same as she did. Haley had never felt so happy. She couldn't begin to find the words to describe her emotions. Most of all, Haley still couldn't believe that she had finally heard Brad say that he loved her. The words had been like a magic potion providing fuel to her feelings of joy. And even though everything that Brad had confessed to her about himself threw her emotions in disarray, deep within her, she still wanted to know more about him. She knew that she wanted to know everything about him. She desperately wanted to know his story. That evening, she had considered asking him to tell her more about himself and had been thinking about the best way to help him open up to her more. When they had finished eating, Brad stood and led her toward the couch. He gently made her sit before he began to speak. "I have a present for you," he said, turning to walk away. She was surprised and watched his back with a bewildered look on her face. But when he returned, she could only gasp. Her husband held a big white teddy bear in his arms as he walked closer to her. And as she looked at him, she saw her adorable Brad again. "He's so cute! The bear, too," she thought. In that instant, Haley briefly forgot about her plans of having him tell her more about himself. She just wanted to savor this moment when he was behaving adorably. "This is for you," he said, and she immediately stretched out her hands to receive his gift. She took hold of it and her eyes sparkled before she hugged the bear tightly. Thank you. This is just so cute and fluffy. Just like you," she said without even glancing in his direction. Brad felt inexplicably jealous of the fluffy white bear as he watched her cuddle his gift. Haley sensed his cold aura brewing, so she raised her face to him. When she saw his expression, she chuckled playfully and held out her hand to him. She pulled him gently to sit down beside her, close enough that their skin was touching before she raised her hand and reached out toward his head. Then she started to gently stroke his hair while her gaze remained fixed on the bear. "Brad, I would like to name this bear." She paused as she started to think about a name. After a few moments, she had finally thought of a name, but just as she was about to ask Brad about it, she glanced over at her adorable husband and found him dozing beside her. As she watched him, his head eventually fell and landed on her shoulder, and he continued to sleep peacefully. Episode 196, Tyler, the Storyteller. Haley couldn't move as she sat on the couch while Brad slept with his head on her shoulder because she was afraid she might disturb him and wake him up. Although it had not been obvious when they were in the courtyard, she noticed that he had been lethargic and lacking energy. And the fact that he had dozed off so quickly and so early in the evening was obviously a sign that he badly needed rest. As these thoughts bounced around Haley's mind, she waited patiently until she felt his slow and heavy breathing, indicating that he had fallen into a deep sleep. Only then did she allow herself to lean back on the couch. A short while later, Tyler walked quietly into the living room and approached Haley on the couch. "Miss Haley, are you all right? How about we let him lie down?" he suggested quietly, but Haley waved her hand. "No, I'm fine. I'm afraid we might wake him if we try to move him," she whispered. Tyler sighed. "I'm sorry, Miss Haley, but he hasn't had any proper rest these past few days. In fact, he didn't even sleep during our 12-hour flight because he was so excited to be coming home to you. So I guess his body has finally reached its limit, and I think he just dozed off like that because he can finally relax now that you're by his side," he explained, smiling. But when Haley heard his words, her tranquil expression changed to one of sorrow. "Why? Why does he need to exhaust himself this much?" she asked as she bit her lip. Seeing the worry and sadness in her eyes, Tyler was lost for words. He hadn't expected her to be so affected by what he said. Her questions made him look at the man sleeping against her shoulder before he moved closer to them. "Miss Haley, I'm going to tell you a story about Brad," he said, and Haley looked at him with wide eyes. "But before that, let's make you both comfortable. Don't worry, he won't wake up because he's too exhausted," he continued. Haley nodded in agreement. Within a few minutes, Haley was leaning back comfortably on the couch, and Brad's head was on her lap. He was still in a deep sleep, and she looked lovingly at him for a long while before the man across from her finally began to speak. "Let me ask you something first, Miss Haley. Do you believe everything Brad has told you about himself?" Tyler asked with a serious expression on his face. Haley immediately responded firmly, nodding her head. "Yes." Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and the desire to know more about her dear husband. She so desperately wanted to hear his story that she was prepared to overlook the fact that Tyler had obviously been eavesdropping in the courtyard. "I want to know more about him. I want to know everything about him," she said with a fierce determination in her voice that also shone through her eyes. Tyler scratched the back of his neck as he smiled with satisfaction. He realized that there was no use hiding anything anymore. Besides, Tyler understood that the woman just wanted to understand more about Brad. Above all, he knew just how difficult it would be for Brad to tell her his story himself. His communication skills were such that he would not be able to recount his story in more than 10 sentences, even if he were explaining it to his beloved wife. Brad had never once tried to talk about his experiences to anyone else, and it made Tyler's head hurt. He imagined Brad only disclosing tiny bits of information to Haley without providing the details that explained the hows and the whys. And it was for this reason that Tyler had decided he should tell Brad's untold story. Apart from helping Brad, he felt that no matter what happened, it was important to help this woman understand Brad's situation. And in order for her to understand his situation, she must know his story. So Tyler finally began to talk. There once was a 7-year-old boy. Episode 197, Brad's Story. Haley sat and listened to Tyler as he spilled the beans about Brad's life. All the time he was speaking, his gaze was just fixed on the vase on the table. He didn't disclose any details about Brad's identity. He didn't mention the names of people and places, but he told her about every important event that had happened ever since Brad arrived in Kentroma. He described what Brad had been through ever since he was a child. He told her how he had lost everything, his beloved mother, and his ability to feel any emotion. He told her how he fought alone even though he had just been a child and how he had managed to survive. He explained all the reasons why he had been molded that way. As Tyler told his story, he didn't realize that the woman sitting across from him had tears flowing quietly from her eyes as she listened intently to every single word he said. Right now, he's still trying to uncover the mystery of what happened in the town. He needs to find out how the bomb was detonated and who was responsible in order to clear his name. Governments around the world are still hunting him, trying to capture him, and that's why he's still in grave danger. I understand why you want to know who he is and to see his face, but I'm afraid that once that happens, you will also be in great danger. And you know Brad never wanted that. He has always tried to protect you at all costs, and that's why I hope you'll understand why he still hasn't revealed his face to you. I'm sure this has been causing him a lot of anxiety, and I'm sure you know just how much he worries about you. So for now, all I ask is that you be patient until he finally decides that the time is right for him to reveal himself to you. As soon as Tyler turned his gaze on the woman across from him, he realized how distressed Haley had been by Brad's story. Tears were flowing down her cheeks, and her heartbreaking reaction profoundly affected him. He had, of course, expected her to be saddened to hear about Brad's childhood and what he had gone through, but he had never expected such a devastating reaction. He stood up because he was at a loss as to what to do, and he was now worried about what Brad would say if he woke up to find his wife so utterly distressed. What have I done? If Brad wakes up now, what will he think? He's going to kill me. What should I do? All these questions were going around in Tyler's mind. First, he rushed to the kitchen, quick as a flash, and returned with a box of tissues. Miss Haley, please don't cry. I'm sorry if I upset you. I didn't mean to. I feel just terrible, he said as he offered her the tissues. Meanwhile, he was crying inside and panicking about what to do. No, I'm sorry. It's just that... Haley paused. Why did he have to go through all this? Why him? I'm just so sad that I couldn't do anything for him. I just wish that I could have been there alongside him when he was fighting alone. She spoke softly as she continued sobbing. Tyler ran away again, and when he came back this time, he had a glass of water in his hand. He was just about to hand it to Haley when he deliberately knocked the vase over. He had decided that he needed to wake up Brad because he was the only person who could console his wife now. The vase crashed to the floor and Brad's eyes opened with a start. Tyler was feeling at once saved and doomed. He knew Brad could comfort Haley, but he wondered what he would do to Tyler as he was the one who had gotten her so upset in the first place. Haley couldn't control her tears and her heart was breaking as she tried to process what Tyler had told her. She couldn't begin to imagine everything he had been through at such a young age. She could find no words, only tears. She felt an unbearable pain and wished that she could have been there to hold him tight and encourage him to stay strong. She wished that she could have been there to gently caress his head, to tell him to keep fighting and that he was not alone. Haley was so distracted by everything Tyler had revealed that she didn't realize that Brad had woken up and had been frozen to the core when he saw his wife sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, Brad had thought that what he was seeing was just a bad dream, but he snapped out of it when he felt her tears falling on his face. He slowly lifted his head from her lap and looked at her with fear and anxiety etched on his face. He was about to ask what was wrong when Haley noticed he had woken up. She suddenly held him so tightly but didn't stop crying. Brad! She uttered his name between sobs, and he thought his heart was being twisted. What's wrong? Are you hurt? What happened? he asked, but she just shook her head. Finally, he noticed Tyler's presence in the room, so he looked at him with questioning eyes. Miss Haley asked me to tell her your story, so I told her about what happened to you when you were young. I didn't think. He paused. I didn't know it would make her so sad. And with that, Tyler turned and practically ran out of the living room. When he had reached what he considered to be a safe distance away from Brad and had found somewhere to hide, he glanced back to spy on the couple on the couch. As he watched them, he smiled his usual mischievous smile. I have no words for your wife, Brad. I think she just cried all the tears that were supposed to be yours, he whispered. Then his gaze fell on Haley, and while he was still smiling, the mischief disappeared, and his smile became tinged with sadness. Miss Haley, you actually don't need to wish for that, because back then, you were the one who saved him, and that time you saved him, you saved me too. Episode 198, The Lullaby. Haley was still sobbing while hugging Brad tightly, and he tried to comfort her by rubbing her back. He had no idea what to do or say to console her, because he had never been in this position before. His only option was to remember what she had done when trying to comfort him. He was relieved that what he did seemed to work, because his wife slowly began to calm down as he continued to caress her back gently. Finally, she stopped crying and raised her head to face him. I'm sorry, Brad said with a guilty look in his eyes. Haley shook her head. No, I should be the one saying sorry because I woke you up, she replied as she smiled softly. Her eyes were swollen and a little red, and there were still traces of tears on her cheeks, so Brad lifted his hand and gently wiped them with his thumb without saying a word. Haley just continued to stare at him before opening her mouth to speak again. Brad, I'm so glad that I finally heard your story. I feel that the heavy burden in my heart has been lifted. All this time, I thought you were keeping secrets from me because you didn't trust me, she said. When he heard that, he was racked with guilt because she had thought that for so long. I'm sorry, he whispered softly, his voice filled with genuine regret. But Haley's reaction to his apology was hard for him to comprehend. She was still able to chuckle sweetly despite the tears, and despite all the emotions she was feeling, she was still able to gently but playfully ruffle his hair. Brad was confused again. He was unaware that Haley had once again been charmed by his cute and adorable nature, which had helped her to overcome whatever unpleasant emotions she might have been feeling. He tilted his head slightly to one side and looked at her with a puzzled gaze. And once again, his apologetic expression and the puzzled look in his eyes effortlessly made him appear more captivating in Haley's eyes. She couldn't stop the smile, despite everything she had just learned and the situation that remained. You're so cute, she said, and she pinched both of his cheeks gently. Brad, of course, had no idea why she was suddenly calling him cute, but at that point, he didn't care as long as she was happy and smiling again. To him, nothing was more important than that. But you still need to rest. Mr. Clark said you haven't been resting properly lately, so you must go to sleep early tonight, she continued as she remembered what Tyler had told her earlier. But as soon as she said that, Brad averted his gaze and paused before he spoke. You don't need to worry. It's fine. And anyway, I think it'll take a while for me to fall asleep again, he said. Haley immediately felt responsible for interrupting Brad's much-needed sleep, so she quickly started to think of a way to make it up to him. She had a quick brainstorm, and a great idea popped up. She remembered something that the substitute butler had told her. When Brad was young, he had loved listening to the soft music of a piano, and it had become his lullaby. Thinking about it, Haley decided to play a song for him. She wanted him to fall asleep and rest, and at the same time, she was curious to know whether the piano music would still work its magic like before. She quickly stood and looked at Brad. Wait here, I'll be right back, she said, and she gave him the white fluffy teddy bear before running off. Brad sat as he was told to on the couch, holding the white teddy bear in his arms, waiting for his wife to return. After a short while, Haley returned, grabbed Brad by the hand, and led him upstairs toward their room. When they entered, she told him to sit on the edge of the bed, and without another word, she turned her head back and moved away. He watched as she walked toward a mini grand piano that had been placed in front of the large window. He was stunned. Before he realized what was happening, his wife was already seated on the piano stool and had started to play. He listened to the individual notes as they gathered to create a melody he recognized. Brad was spellbound, and his heart began to race. The song his wife was playing was, without a doubt, the same song he knew from 10 years ago. Episode 199, The Wrath of the World. 10 years ago, 2 boys had appeared in a small remote town of Castendale. One of the boys had appeared weak and could barely stand upright without help, while the other's eyes had burned with indescribable strength. They had walked for hours before they had finally arrived at their destination. Tyler had held Brad's arm around his shoulder, and his other hand had held him around his waist. They had both stood in front of an enormous building. A month before, Brad had found the place by accident when he hacked one of Talavantia's satellites to search for a perfect contingency hideout, just in case something ruined their escape plan. The town had been strangely unique. All 300 residents lived under the same roof, and grocery stores, the medical clinic, church, and school were all housed within the same building. It had been almost midnight when Tyler had managed to break into the building. They had both entered through the southeast corner and had headed straight toward the school. The school had been dark and quiet when they reached it. Brad, who had been half dead and had not spoken a single word since his mother had been shot only hours before, had suddenly said, "To the computer room." When he had heard him utter those words, Tyler, who had never been afraid of anyone or anything before in his life, had felt a shiver run down his spine. This had been the first time that Tyler had heard the terrifying tone in Brad's voice, and the first time he had felt his ice-cold aura. His voice and aura had dripped with a lust for revenge, and when Brad had finally raised his head, Tyler had only seen horror shining from his eyes. The room had felt as if an icy dark cloud had seeped inside and had shrouded everything as a warning of impending catastrophe. Brad's eyes had turned deadly, as if his only desire had been to destroy the world. Tyler had looked at him and had known that he had to follow every word he said. It had not been because he had been scared, but because he had known that Brad had been about to lose all rationality left inside him. Inside the school's computer room, a young boy was consumed by the aura of a monster that had risen from the deepest pit of hell. He had blazed with nothing but murderous intent, extreme anger, and pure hatred. It had been as though, in that instant, Brad's heart had shriveled and died, and he could no longer feel anything at all. His brain had been telling him just to end everything, and he had wanted nothing but blood and revenge. He had wanted to turn the world into chaos. He had wanted his mother back. And Tyler, who had just been standing behind him, had been no different. Since the day Brad had given him his name, Tyler had sworn that as long as he lived, he would protect Brad, even if the world went against them. He had sworn that he would stand by him and never let anyone lay a hand on him. And he had proved his unwavering loyalty and allegiance to Brad many times over. He had even managed to keep Brad safe from assassins just hours before, but he had failed because he had been unable to protect Brad's mother. As he stood there watching him, Tyler had realized that protecting only Brad was not enough, because he had failed to protect the person that Brad held dear above all others. Brad had been rendered vulnerable to pain and anguish. To quell that vulnerability, Brad had killed his feelings. And Tyler had known that it would be difficult for Brad to feel anything ever again. And Tyler had felt some responsibility for that, because he had failed to save Riley. So Tyler had just stood there helplessly, and he had watched Brad fight all his inner demons at once. He had turned into someone irredeemable, and he had started to destroy himself. Meanwhile, in a 7-star hotel somewhere in New York City, Brandon Rockman and his mistress Rachel had been watching the midnight news bulletin, anticipating the latest news about what had happened with his son. Rachel had connections with the Black Leaf organization, and she had been informed that the fearsome hacker monster, the world's most wanted criminal, had been identified as Brandon Rockman's son, Brad. She had passed the information on to Brandon, and the man had immediately gone crazy. The news had made him mindlessly plan for his own son's assassination. He had never thought to stop and think that his son might be innocent. Brandon had reasoned that it would be better for him to have his own son destroyed than to allow his son to experience the wrath of the world. He had convinced himself that his reasons for ordering the assassination had been justified. However, Rachel hadn't been satisfied with Brandon's plan to only murder the son. She had interfered and had sent a secret message to the assassins to have Riley killed as well. So, Rachel had been secretly celebrating the death of her rival, while Brandon Rockman had been feeling a little uneasy. After all, Brad had still been his son, even if he had never cared much for him. As he had tried to justify his actions to himself, believing his son to be dead, he had no idea that his son had somehow survived. The two evil and scheming individuals had sat together on the couch, each contemplating their separate victories with the deaths of both Brad and his mother Riley. And as they had watched the television, their eyes had almost bulged from their sockets in shock and horror with the sudden appearance of a message that flashed across the screen and sent shivers of terror up and down their spines. "You will die, Brandon Rockman. I will burn you all to ashes." Episode 200, Planning Vengeance. Unknown to the world, a month previously, Brad had already managed to track down a ballistic missile that had been stored in an underground silo somewhere in the state of New Mexico. The missile had been kept on a hair-trigger alert and had actually been kept online for 24 hours a day, ready to be launched anytime if war ever broke out. It had been a weapon that could be dispatched in less than a few minutes, and it had therefore been the perfect missile for Brad to target. All Brad had been thinking about was seeking revenge. He had begun an all-out attack to take control of the missile, and within a few short hours, he had succeeded. It was just as he had always maintained. There was no such thing as an unhackable system in this interconnected world, no matter how secure it was considered to be. Without wasting a single second, he had continued tapping at the computer keyboard non-stop as he had mercilessly prepared for the launching of the bomb to be detonated toward his target, the city where his very own father lived. As he had watched Brad at work and realized what he intended to do, Tyler had only been able to stand behind him with clenched fists. He had felt shivers up and down his spine, and he had known that when Brad managed to launch the missile, there would be no turning back. Tyler had known that the world would never forgive him, and even if they could manage to escape, Tyler had been fully aware that there would be no future for them. He had seen that Brad did not care about anything anymore. He had been completely blinded by rage, and Tyler had known that he could do nothing to stop him. Since the day they had met, Tyler had never once gone against Brad's will. He could not and would not ever defy any order from Brad. The day that his mother had been murdered, Brad's heart had died, and all hope within him had vanished. He had transformed into a child that was merely breathing, and the single thing that had kept him moving forward had been a desire for vengeance. All those years he had spent living in hell, he had endured it all for his mother's sake. But now that she had gone, he could see no reason to continue fighting, and he had lost the will to live. He had finally reached his limit. He had been exhausted, believed that everything was futile, and that the world was nothing but a living hell. All that had prompted his decision to end it once and for all. As Tyler had waited, every single movement of the hand on the clock had been part of the launch procedure toward the apocalypse. But now, they had reached the final countdown. Brad had finally succeeded, and it would only take a single tap on the keyboard to end it all. When everything had been ready and the moment had finally come, Brad had raised his hand, but he had paused and turned to Tyler. "Tyler, I'm setting you free," he had said. Tyler had trembled as he had forced himself to speak. "I will never leave you. As long as I live, I will protect you. That's my promise to myself and to our mother," Tyler had said, but Brad had just cast him a cold and empty smile as he returned his gaze to the computer screen. In the next instant, like a heartless monster, Brad had lifted his hand again, ready to hit the key. Tyler had held his breath and closed his eyes. However, just before his finger had been about to activate the fateful key, as though someone invisible had just arrived to stop him, Brad had suddenly stood still. Out of nowhere, somewhere beyond where they sat in that dark room, the sound of someone playing the piano could be heard. And the moment the soft sound reached Brad's ears, his hands seemed to freeze in place.